The luxurious carriage flew like the wind, carrying a lady who was delighted by the grandeur of the imperial palace, which for the first time spread out before her eyes. Dazzled by its magnificence, she turned to the empress with a question about the ultimate pleasure. Honestly wondering how one could get used to such incredible beauty, she remained silent in response, her gaze wandering somewhere far away. The lady shared her future joys of life in the palace, where she could enjoy that miracle every day, and waited for Her Highness's approving opinion. The answer about ignorance came in a cold, indifferent tone. The girl noticed the shadow of sadness that had settled on the empress's face, worriedly assuming her possible guilt in her sadness. She expressed a sincere desire for understanding. The mistress, gritting her teeth, remained silent, because in front of her sat her husband's mistress. A few days ago in the imperial palace, in the luxurious chambers of Her Majesty, maids were bustling around helping their mistress get dressed. One of them, the lively Soroka with burning eyes, shared her impressions of yesterday's walk, where she met an extremely handsome gentleman. In the world of the Beastmen Empire, such encounters were not uncommon. The embarrassed magpie chirped that the leopard had almost turned her hair into feathers from excitement. The calmer white-eyed owl and the melodious nightingale stood aside and barely held back their laughter, watching the girl's confusion. After all, although they had human form, their bestial essence was felt more strongly. 5 years had passed since the ruler had settled in the empire of the Beastmen. White-Eye cautiously suggested adding some exquisite jewelry to her outfit, hinting at her first breakfast with the emperor in a long time, when Her Majesty should have shone so that his gaze would forever imprint her image. Suddenly, the nightingale's melodious voice interrupted the magpie's chatter. The girl instantly frowned and apologized to the empress. Her Highness assured her in a gentle voice that everything was fine. He said it was just a name, and there was no point in giving it too much importance, especially since something like that wouldn't happen again. A sudden scream from another maidservant bursting into the room announced the terrible news. Panting, she reported the woman who bore the emperor's name. The lady was shocked by the news. Meanwhile, in the castle, over a sumptuous breakfast, His Majesty sat unmoved. He heard rumors of Tidi's arrival in the imperial carriage, and he inquired about her whereabouts from his wife. Hearing this, the woman instantly guessed that the rival had the impudent nickname Tidi, and with bitterness she asked her husband why he hadn't talked to her sooner. The emperor, meeting her gaze with cold calm, agreed. He added that it had indeed been a long time since they had had a sincere conversation. The woman broke the silence by asking about his dream. With a smile, he replied that, according to rumors, the named feel at peace next to their destiny. The owner thought it was a fiction, but it turned out to be true. Pleasant hugs, warmth, and tenderness. The empress did not like his carefree story about another. With a barely perceptible smile, she spoke of her joy for him. She asked if he had the same mark on his body. The man denied it, not understanding her concern. Her Highness explained that as an empress, she was naturally concerned that his name might be tattooed on another woman's skin. In a calm tone, His Majesty asked if she had anything else to say. Rising from the table, he announced his departure. The empress quietly expressed her wishes for eternal peace for the empire. But the emperor, unmoved and silent, left her alone in the silence of the dining room. Covering her trembling lips with her hand to suppress her bitter sobs, the woman could not hold back her tears. A picture of their youth appeared before her inner vision. She was bathed in the silvery moonlight of a cozy forest glade. They lay side by side, he in the majestic form of a white wolf, and the young girl was enveloped by a feeling of incredible peace and comfort in his long, soft fur. Suddenly, the beastly image disappeared. A handsome young man appeared before her. He considered his appearance intimidating, but she ardently assured him otherwise. The young man said that her name, Sepia, would certainly bloom on his skin, like a seal of their shared destiny. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. He explained that there was an ancient custom in the world of beastmen. The names of their condemned would appear on their bodies. Sepia denied it with a light laugh, considering it all a fairy tale. But the guy insisted that with the appearance of a name, they would fall unconditionally in love with their partner. The girl noted that she was human, and his name would not appear on her skin. The young man gently hugged her, whispering that the name of his beloved would forever be in his heart. He asked Sepia not to worry, because she was his destiny. Suddenly, her memories were interrupted by a female voice, who rhetorically asked about the wonder of fate. The lady confidently assured him that the emperor would not stop talking about her, putting a hidden mockery into the words. Her Highness only cautiously confirmed her words. Titi was about to leave, feeling the pull of her own mark towards the ruler. With a smug smile, she noted that the Empress had never seen the name. The surprised woman looked at her. Then the girl, asking her opinion, showed her the name Demios, which was not on Her Majesty's body, assuring her that she had not expected it to appear there, but she thought her husband would like it. The lady couldn't wipe the smug smile off the Empress's face. Then, approaching her, she whispered in her ear, so that Her Highness would not worry. From now on, she would be the one to warm the imperial bed. Turning sharply, Titi defiantly left the room, leaving the Empress stunned by what she heard. Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the silence. The mistress saw the emperor pick up the lady in his arms and warn her to be careful with her priceless body. In response, she smiled coquettishly and apologized to His Majesty, explaining that she had simply tripped. The man was surprised by their joint presence and the relaxed atmosphere between them. The girl assured him that they had arrived together in the Empress's carriage, and her visit was an unexpected surprise. The emperor, looking at her and gently stroking her cheek, seemed to have completely succumbed to her charms. Her Highness asked the reason for his return, assuming he had something to say. But before he could open his mouth, Titi intervened. She complained of fatigue and a desire to rest. The lord agreed, and they left together. Sepia, saddened, silently watched after them, under the silvery glow of the full moon that illuminated the imperial garden. The woman wandered sleeplessly. A recent conversation came back to life in her memory. The lady's poisonous hostility was in every word. She hadn't felt such anger in a long time, despite all the trials she had gone through to end up in the palace. The wind played with her cloak, but the mistress's thoughts were firm. She had no right to be weak. It was her duty to be strong. A sudden gust of wind tore her cloak from her shoulders, and the coolness of the night filled Her Highness. Deep in her thoughts, she did not notice how far she had come. Quiet footsteps broke Sepia's solitude, and a warm cloak was carefully placed on her shoulders. A calm and deep male voice remarked that her outfit was too light for the coolness of the night. Turning around, the Empress was surprised to see the stranger, and immediately asked about his appearance in the garden. Her Majesty was interested in who he was, a predator or a herbivore. His appearance inclined him to the former. The man explained that he had gotten lost while exploring the palace and asked to be guided. The woman, casually noting his ignorance of her title, agreed. She felt the need to thank him for his concern. Wandering through the garden alleys, they went further and further, and accidentally glancing at his hands, the Empress noticed many deep scars. A suggestion appeared in her mind. Could he be the hero who had returned after defeating the savages? And she dared to ask his name. Meeting Her Majesty's interested gaze, the man was slightly embarrassed. Realizing his excessive curiosity, she smiled awkwardly. Calling her question a bad joke, she asked if he knew the meaning of her necklace. The man confirmed the woman's marital status. He apologized for his attention and asked to be called simply Roxanne. The woman showed him the way straight to the palace gates. The man thanked the madam for her help and assured her that she would be able to return the cloak at the next meeting. The lady thanked him and turned and left. Her Highness assumed that he was probably one of the guests at the upcoming victory celebration. The man watched her impassively. In the Empress's chambers, the maid Soroka did not hide her anger, inquiring about the knight's absence because she was sincerely worried for Her Majesty. The mistress apologized, explaining that she had only taken a walk in the garden. As she folded the cloak, Magpie asked in surprise about its male origin. Suddenly, the Empress snatched it away, assuring him that it was nothing special. Turning away to hide her blush, she was about to go to sleep. Ordering the maid to go and rest, the girl, concerned about the lady's well-being due to insomnia, brought warm tea. However, the woman assured her that everything was fine, and the maid, feeling relieved, left the room. Sepia lay down in bed, but her anxiety did not leave her. The name Roxanne kept coming to mind. He was so unlike Demios. Black hair, golden eyes like a stranger. She decided that if she had the chance, she would definitely return his cloak. And finally, she fell into a deep and pleasant sleep. The next morning at breakfast, the Empress was outraged by the ruler's accusation that she had pushed Titi. The man insisted on her pretended lack of understanding. She was shocked that he was talking about the guest meeting yesterday, because it was an accident. In a stern tone, the ruler remarked that jealousy never brought good, especially in their relationship. But Sepia continued to deny her involvement. In a calm voice, His Majesty assured her, since no one was hurt, he would ignore it that time. The woman replied that it was not her fault, so there was no need for leniency. His Highness warned against exaggerating the problem. Otherwise, he would conduct an investigation. The woman did not understand on what basis and whether he had any evidence. The man was silent, and the Empress realized that he was accusing her without reason and did not want to listen. She also noticed the woman's excessive excitement, and he added that Titi had no reason to lie to him. When their eyes met, the woman asked if he really believed that the lady had no motive to slander her. The mistress stood up and stopped the argument, once again assuring him of her innocence. After saying goodbye, she wished him a delicious breakfast and left. Evening found the Empress again in the garden, alone by the lake. Suddenly, she saw the reflection of Demios in the water. Peering in, she asked about his disappearance. But the image dissipated, and in his place appeared the same man, whom she had met the previous evening. The surprise in her voice mixed with joy when he greeted her. Roxanne surprised the woman in the garden. After all, that place is closed to everyone except the imperial family. She asked how he ended up in it. The man just smiled mysteriously, calling it their little secret, and he explained that he had wandered there by chance while he was busy looking for maple leaves. He asked if she had seen those magical maples. Then Roxanne suggested that they take a walk together to admire them. Her Highness was surprised by his proposal, not understanding what he meant. In response, the young man smiled, remarking that all beauty should be shared with friends. Sepia was embarrassed. The man said that he hadn't been to that garden for a long time after the war, just like he hadn't been to the palace. And he felt lonely, so he offered her friendship. The Empress agreed, and it was a great honor for him. The woman thought that for true friendship they needed to open up. After all, she couldn't hide her true status forever, and she suggested they introduce themselves. He liked the idea. Suddenly, a female voice called out to Her Highness. Suddenly, the Emperor's mistress appeared before them. The woman was startled by Titi's appearance on her own property. She anxiously asked what she was doing in the garden, fearing that Roxanne would find out about her high status. The lady said that His Majesty had given her permission. If the girl liked the place, she was to let him know. In her opinion, the wonderful lake would be ideally suited to being cleared of reeds and planting camellias in the winter and cherries in the spring. But the mistress categorically refused, considering it unacceptable. The lady, feigning innocence, sincerely did not understand her constant refusals. A furious rage swept over the woman. First her place and now the imperial possessions. Everything became the object of that girl's encroachments. She could not understand why that impudent and arrogant person was given the mark of Demios by the goddess. Her Majesty pointed out that it was the backyard of the imperial palace, where only members of the imperial family were allowed to enter. The young lady was surprised, for she had not known that. Then it occurred to her that the gentleman also belonged to the imperial family. The man replied that he was a friend of Her Highness. Titi did not know that she had a friend, but she was curious to know what they did together. Roxanne assured him that they just wanted to take a walk. Smiling, the lady agreed that a walk was always wonderful, but she was bored and wanted to join them. The man gallantly informed her that it was impossible. After all, his friend was only the Empress. Looking at him, Sepia understood that the man was a master at refusing. Suddenly, the girl clapped her hands and exclaimed that she understood everything, and she unambiguously hinted at their relationship, and then added that the mistress also had a lover. Her Highness and her husband were amazed at such audacity. The woman did not take her stern gaze from Titi. She sighed with relief with an innocent look, hinting that Her Majesty should not be alone, and coming closer, she asked him not to worry about gossip. After all, the lady is not so stupid as to spread it. The mistress firmly stated that her friend was not a lover, but that the girl's words were an insult. Titi only apologized and asked her husband if it was all true. Sepia noticed how the lady's gaze had changed since she had shown the mark last time. That evening, behind the mask of naivety, there was hostility. To Titi's words, the man replied that who knows? After all, if she herself was a mistress, then perhaps she considered everyone to be one. His directness struck the Empress. The lady, making a guilty face, apologized again. She turned sharply and announced that she was going to leave. Looking after her, the mistress asked her husband, did he know about her connection with the Emperor? He assured her that everyone in the capital knew about it. Sepia noticed that the ruler clearly spoiled the girl. She also noted that Roxanne's open hostility towards Titi could make him a target for the ruler. With a smile, he asked if the Empress was worried about him, to which she answered in the affirmative without hesitation. Coming closer, Roxanne said that then the woman would protect him from His Majesty in the name of their friendship. Sepia met his gaze and assured him that she would do so. Then, citing the late hour, she said it was time for her to go. The man smiled and said goodbye, saying he would meet her at the festival, and left. The mistress looked after him, remembering that she had not thanked him. The Empress was walking down a wide, light-filled corridor, accompanied by the bustling magpie. Suddenly, her ears caught the conversation of two young ladies. One wondered why they had not yet returned to the capital. The other, not understanding why, was indignant at the unjust delay and ignorance of the ruler's plans. Coming closer, Her Highness inquired about the subject of their conversation. The alarmed girls informed Her Majesty. What exactly was discussed was the campaign against the savages and their detention outside the capital. The Empress was surprised. It seemed to her that they had arrived a month ago. However, the young ladies assured that the heroes were ordered to wait outside the city walls, where they had set up camp by order of the Emperor. Sepia was shocked by the order regarding the heroes who were supposed to be the center of the celebrations. One of the girls expressed her incomprehension of this attitude towards the winners. The Empress thanked him for the information, and she pondered Demios's strange order, deciding to speak to him immediately. Suddenly, the excited voice of an assistant called the Empress, Madame Remedy, whom the woman had never seen so anxious. She announced with unusual excitement that His Majesty was waiting for the lady in the reception room. The unexpected news caused the woman deep surprise. Crossing the threshold of his office, Sepia gestured for the Emperor to sit down. The man turned away and remained tensely silent. She couldn't understand the reason for the Lord's tense look, wondering if it was related to the conversation she had heard earlier. An agitated Demios approached her and told her that Titi had seen her by the lake with another man. The embarrassed Empress completely forgot about that meeting. Sepia thought that the girl certainly couldn't keep quiet, and she asked if she had cried again and complained about her behavior. The Emperor was worried about who the man was. After all, Her Highness had already invited him to the lake. Could it be that Titi had caught them on a secret date? The woman indignantly denied that the man was just a friend. The enraged ruler declared that friendship between a man and a woman was incredible. But it was obvious to the Empress, perhaps. His gaze was ardent, hot, and serious. But the woman wanted to ask him something more important. What interested the Emperor, and he was waiting for her request. She insisted on the revocation of the order to detain the detachment. But the man rudely refused her, considering it not her competence. However, the mistress wisely pointed out that the warriors were also her subjects, and despite the hostility of Duke Leofor, their exploits deserve respect for the service of the empire. Her Majesty emphasized the just attitude of the ruler. The Emperor's anger erupted with an order to be silent. Frightened, the woman noticed the locked windows and the restless swaying of his hair. It was a clear sign of the beast's transformation. He abruptly told her she was free to do as she pleased and left the room. His Majesty's fury left Her Highness deeply perplexed. At that moment, an agitated maid entered the room. She anxiously inquired about the lady's well-being. The mistress, having gathered her thoughts, calmed her down and gave a clear order. Immediately send a messenger to the eastern gate of the capital, with orders for the detachment to enter the city and provide them with lodgings for the night. Madame Remedy accepted the order with a bow. Meanwhile, the Empress could not understand how Roxanne had gotten into the palace. After all, he was also in that detachment. The soldiers were camped near the palace. Suddenly, one of them shouted for the gates to be opened. Everyone raised their hands, expressing joy at the permission. The soldier asked the commander if the gate was really open. He confirmed that it seemed that the Lord had regained consciousness. The subordinate remarked, "What an insult to the imperial family. Even before the celebration began, they could have arrested the commander, but it didn't matter." He said that after 10 years of hell they deserved a better reception. However, they did not understand where Mr. Roxanne was. The other soldiers greeted him with a military salute. The surprised commander asked where he had been. After all, the gates had only recently opened. Roxanne calmly said that he knew, because he was nearby. The commander noticed that the Emperor did open the gates, although he had expected this only on the day of the celebration. However, the gentleman objected, explaining that it was Her Majesty's decision. The news did not come as a surprise to the man. He did not believe in the Emperor's ability to do such a thing. Roxanne reassured him, promising that the ruler would later regret his decision. The words of the gentleman surprised the commander. Commander-in-Chief Roxanne ordered to return to the capital. The men raised their hands joyfully. The lavishly decorated banquet hall was bustling with life with numerous guests. There, a solemn announcement was made about the arrival of the Emperor and Her Majesty. The audience greeted them with a burst of loud applause. They walked side by side, holding hands tightly. The Empress felt countless eyes on her. It was their first official appearance in the world, after the news of His Majesty's mistress had spread through the palace. The Emperor, holding his wife's hand tightly, carefully helped her to take her place on the throne. The gazes of all present merged into a single, curious stream. Seeking to penetrate the secrets of their ruined relationship, the ruler's mistress attracted particular attention, who, despite everything, took a place of honor, reserved exclusively for blood members of the imperial family. Sepia, despite her inner torment, made incredible efforts to maintain her dignity. Losing her composure in public was unacceptable. Her gaze swept across the hall, maintaining a mask of impassive dignity on her face. Suddenly, the hall was filled with the sounds of music, and a wave of excited whispers swept through those present, filled with surprised questions about his unexpected appearance. But for the Empress, everything turned out to be a real shock. Roxanne simply stood before her, like a vision. It was he who majestically made his way to the imperial throne, in elegant attire with numerous orders shining from his chest. She couldn't believe her eyes. Standing before her was Roxanne, who turned out to be none other than Duke Leofor himself. The man, known to the general public as Claude, stopped right in front of them and, in a gesture of deep respect, knelt down. At that moment, the mistress realized he was hiding his true origins, pretending to be a completely different person. Roxanne looked up calmly at Sepia. The Emperor greeted him with a commanding tone on his triumphant return. In response, the man loudly and clearly introduced himself as Claude Leofor and announced his victory over the savages. He continued, noting that the exploration of magical mines was ongoing, and at that time 6 deposits had been discovered in the savage lands, and the exploration of unexplored territories continued actively. Her Highness was deeply impressed. For her, finding even one mine was an extremely difficult challenge. The guests whispered enthusiastically about the Duke's impressive successes. His Majesty, with a sigh of dissatisfaction, acknowledged the work done well. He assured that the Duke's merits were worthy of the highest honors, and he asked what reward he wanted for his triumphant victory. Perhaps he wanted complete power over the lands of the barbarians. Perhaps he was attracted by the gold-rich western territories. However, the man suddenly declared that he only sought the blessing of Her Majesty. Sepia was stunned by what she heard. She wondered if he had really asked for her blessing. The Emperor noted that such a request was usually made to the High Priest. However, Roxanne objected. He claimed that the owner of the title of the Star Ishtar, the Holy Empire itself, it is she who is worthy of bestowing blessings. The priest pointed to Sepia. And no one except the Star Ishtar is capable of reviving the empire of the Beastmen, unless they bind themselves by marriage. He emphasized that she was the same star, to whom Demios himself had once proposed. And that evening Roxanne turned to her with a request for a blessing. The lady rose from her seat, her eyes flashing with agreement. She had never given a blessing before, but for the sake of the Lord, she felt she could overcome her own insecurities. Approaching him, she placed her hand on his shoulder, and full of dignity, Her Majesty solemnly proclaimed that, like the Star Ishtar, she bestowed blessings on Duke Leofor. The thought of parting words came to her mind, bringing back to life an old conversation. A lonely stranger, longing for companionship, reached out a hand of friendship. Therefore, the woman sincerely wished him to find his true place in life and to get rid of the oppressive loneliness forever. Those sincere words brought a look of surprise to the man's face. He gently took her hand, raised it to his lips, and kissed it. He also solemnly proclaimed the prosperity of the Beastman Empire. The mistress felt heat spread across her face. Solemn music filled the hall. The Master of Ceremonies announced that His Majesty the Emperor and Her Majesty would honor the ball with the first dance. Demios and his wife stepped onto the sparkling parquet floor and the dance began. The ruler stared at her, and then, with a slight irony, he whispered about his noticed presence. The woman did not immediately understand the meaning of His Majesty's words. With a venomous smile, he assured her that he was talking about the Empress's lover. The Empress flared up in indignation, categorically denying the allusions to lovers. However, Her husband had ordered her to stay as far away from Duke Leofor as possible. She could not understand the reason for his hostility. Sepia firmly declared that he had no right to interfere in her personal relationships. Feeling completely insulted, she announced her immediate departure. Suddenly, Titi appeared. Turning a pitying glance at the emperor, she anxiously inquired about his well-being, noting his unhealthy appearance. He assured her that he felt great, and extending his hand, he asked her to come with him. She complied, giving him a gentle smile, encouraging him. The empress thought. Perhaps the ruler liked the lady because she knew how to make him smile, unlike her. Meanwhile, a considerable circle of people also formed around Titi, eager to make acquaintances. She was warmly welcomed, and she reciprocated with sincere friendliness. Watching the events unfold from the sidelines, Sepia noticed how many of those present were eager to make profitable acquaintances with the girl. The lady announced that due to her own illness she was unable to host the traditional debutante ball, and she was sincerely grateful for the warm and cordial welcome. Suddenly, a man and a woman approached Titi, enthusiastically congratulating their beloved daughter. The girl happily responded to her parents' greetings. There was a whisper among those present, newcomers, provincial aristocrats, who sought to take advantage of Titi's position. Another guest confirmed the assumption, and added that she had heard rumors about their adoption of an adult girl, passing her off as their own daughter. The subject of conversation soon naturally turned to the Duke himself. One of the ladies remarked that he was even more impressive than they had imagined. Another confessed that she had previously considered His Majesty the embodiment of the masculine ideal in the empire, but now her heart was more fond of the Duke. The emperor was too perfect. His beauty, according to the lady, surpassed that of a woman. However, Duke Leofor seemed to be someone who could protect. Her Highness mentally remarked. Roxanne's obvious power was inevitably compared to the divine power of the imperial family. Suddenly, Mother Titi appeared next to the Empress. With a sly smile, she asked about a cavalier for Her Majesty, and she immediately offered her eldest son, Gallard de Louvre. The mistress, to her great regret, was well aware of the reputation of the young man from the Louvre house. He was a notorious drunken libertine, and the mere thought of him pierced her. What lady would agree to dance with such a man? Coming closer, Gallard's father firmly declared that everything was fine. Their son was the epitome of a true gentleman. He also added that in his opinion the warriors had spent too much time in the lands of the savages, and who knew what bad habits they might have picked up there. Those present were deeply shocked. After all, such bold words were spoken to the heroes of the celebration, and Sepia felt a shock run through her. Soon, shifting their attention, one of the guests cautiously remarked that there were rumors that His Majesty had opened the gates for the army in advance. Another lady expressed obvious concern. After all, the victory ceremony was to take place soon. Count Louvre, as if filled with unbridled delight, confirmed the news, and assured that everything said was absolutely true. He turned to the lady with shining eyes, praising His Majesty as the majestic and just ruler of the empire. He also noted that the name of the great man is forever immortalized in the honor of their daughter, the silver wolf and the white doe, and he called them a perfect couple. Titi stepped closer with a barely noticeable sly smile and childlike innocence on her face, which skillfully concealed her true intentions. Suddenly, she admitted that it was actually her who had helped allow the troops to enter the capital. Her words came like a bolt from the blue. One of the ladies standing nearby gasped in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had no idea that the lady could be so caring. Titi, without losing a single drop of her confidence, only smiled charmingly. She remarked that those people had brought incomparable glory to the empire, and she explained that she only wanted them to be treated with due respect and dignity. That is why she dared to address this request to the emperor. Suddenly, the commander's angry voice, full of genuine indignation, rang through the hall. It turned out that the Empress herself had ordered the gates opened. He turned to Roxanne, demanding confirmation that everything was indeed so. The commander-in-chief confirmed his words with dignity. He clearly stated that all those events unfolded thanks to the exceptional mercy and unwavering determination of Her Majesty. The commander, barely restraining his surprise, added that the mistress not only let them in, but also generously provided them with a decent place to live. The Duke noted that even those who were unable to be part of that triumph were infinitely grateful to Her Majesty for her unexpected kindness and foresight. There was an enthusiastic buzz among the guests. She was enthusiastically proclaimed to be the true Ishtar. After all, with the arrival of the star to the empire of the Beastmen, peace reigned. All testified to her benevolence and wisdom, extolling her as the mother of the empire. The attention of the audience turned away from Titi, leaving her bewildered. She watched as the guests' curious and judgmental glances passed over her, and the quiet whispers merged into an incomprehensible hubbub. No one could understand why the emperor's favorite, so charming and innocent in appearance, dared to turn out to be a liar. Lost in her own thoughts, the bewildered Titi whispered in a barely audible voice that she was certain that her request to the emperor would be granted. The commander was mockingly surprised by her concern. After all, the son of the empire would hardly care about the complaints heard in the bedroom. The young ladies present, picking up on his mocking tone, began to openly mock him, while the girl only sank deeper into a whirlpool of confusion. Suddenly her father stood up for her. He angrily asked how they dared to call his daughter a concubine, emphasizing the unacceptable disrespect. The man added that he had known that those troops were imbued with a wild, barbaric spirit. Suddenly, the commanding voice of a lord was heard. He turned to Count Louvre and reprimanded him for insulting his subordinates, emphasizing that he had not yet realized what everything could turn out to be. Turning around, the man recognized Claude, and at the same moment, from an uncontrollable, paralyzing terror, long gray donkey ears suddenly appeared on his head. Those present burst into uncontrollable laughter as they watched this amazing transformation. Some exclaimed loudly about the Count's unbearable shame. Mr. Louvre bowed deeply, almost theatrically, and apologized to the embarrassed lord. Then, together with his wife, he hurriedly headed for the exit. The lady cautiously approached Roxanne and barely audibly noted that her father might have really crossed the line. She offered timidly. As a token of apology, Titi wanted to ask him to dance. The lord gave her a quick but attentive glance, and he politely replied that he wished to dedicate the first dance to their benevolent empress. The woman looked deeply impressed. While the lady felt humiliated to the core of her soul, she suppressed her bitter disappointment when Roxanne bowed before her mistress. He asked permission to ask her to dance. Sepia graciously agreed, and they plunged into a whirlpool of waltz that circled them amidst flickering lights and voices. During a light yet intimate dance, the man quietly asked if she was upset by his previous secrecy. Her Highness noted that denying it would be a blatant lie. However, she added that she had also kept her title a secret, so they were even. The lord looked at her with warmth and emphasized that his real name was Roxanne, given by his mother, and it was dearer to him than the name Claude, by which he was known. He asked to continue to be called Roxanne as they had become friends. Her Majesty, touching his hand, heartily agreed. The emperor watched their dance with undisguised displeasure. His eyes burned with uncontrollable rage. In the dark corridor, Demios coldly observed that the lord had indeed returned. The man assured him that everything had happened thanks to his majesty and his incomprehensible will. But for the ruler, those words had no meaning. He authoritatively emphasized that Roxanne could not change anything and had no right to say such things at all. Coming close, his majesty warned that the lord would lose everything. After all, the empire and its highness belonged exclusively to him. The lord, pretending to be concerned about his husband's fatigue, recommended that he rest, but he himself announced that he was leaving. Those words deeply angered Roxanne. In a separate room, Titi's guardians were having a heated argument. Her father was going wild, throwing dishes, unable to comprehend how the impudent young man publicly humiliated him in front of all the aristocrats. His wife trembled for the expensive service and reprimanded him for his careless words. The husband immediately took out his burning anger on her, accusing her of not being able to control even her own children and of her son being a drunkard. He mockingly wondered how she dared to say anything to him at all. The woman in response was indignant as to why he had spoken about Gallard, and what her fault was. Suddenly, Titi slammed her hand firmly on the table, causing the dishes to clank, and then stood up in an instant. With a radiant smile, she told them to calm down. After all, it was far from the last chance. She confidently promised to talk to the emperor and arrange everything as best as possible. The parents instantly rushed to hug their beloved daughter, their faces brightening. The man proudly assured them that she was their true, reliable daughter. Without wasting a moment, they moved on to urgent requests, begging Titi to turn to the lord for a sword for Hallard, who dreamed of becoming a knight. They also mentioned the unsuccessful search for a decent home in the capital, which they could not find, transparently hinting at possible help from His Majesty. The lady caught their attention with a quick clap of her hands. With a charming smile, she announced that the emperor would be coming, so it was time for them to go. The parents, full of clear understanding that winning his favor was above all else, immediately agreed. The man hastily bowed and assured them that they were leaving, and the mother, before they hurriedly left the room, reminded her daughter of all their requests. As soon as the door closed behind the guardians, Titty's face contorted into a wild grimace of rage. She exclaimed that they had irritated her unbearably, and she started tearing out strands of her hair. And then she started smashing dishes furiously because everything around her was driving her crazy. The lady contemptuously called them hyenas who were always demanding something. The frightened maids froze in place just watching the angry lady. The girl shouted that her relatives looked ridiculous in public. Turning sharply, she shouted to the assistants to clean up immediately. The maids hurriedly gathered up the broken dishes. Titty, silently passing by one of them, suddenly deliberately stepped on her hand. The girl winced and winced from the sharp pain, but didn't make a sound. After that, the young lady smiled faintly with relief. She resolutely ordered the maids to prepare the carriage immediately. After all, she wanted to go to Demios, away from the unbearable fools of the Louvre family. The lady slipped silently into His Majesty's dark, night-silenced bedchamber. The sovereign was lying in the room and sat up in surprise. His gaze expressed a question about what had happened. Titty, throwing off her robe as she walked, explained that she had come alone. After all, the emperor had not come. Sitting down next to him, she admired his sculpted body, which was striking in its perfection. A decision was etched in her mind. She would definitely make him hers. Throwing herself into the Lord's arms, Titty whispered passionately that she was looking forward to meeting him. He was surprised by her unusual lack of indignation, and he noticed that she always behaved humbly before him. Unlike some, words that concealed an incomprehensible bitterness. Looking at him, the lady thought to herself, was he talking about the Empress? And sometimes His Highness's thoughts were not about her. Titty's voice was filled with languid devotion. She said that the Lord was always in her heart. The lady would forever be his most loyal, obedient doe. The girl knew perfectly well that he preferred such weak women, those who were incapable of anything without the emperor's support and presence. Demios gazed admiringly at his lady, whose words so harmoniously fit into his idea of the ideal woman. Then he gently touched his name on her chest, where her heart was beating, and began to kiss the girl. She was thinking in her mind with cold determination. In order to conquer His Majesty, she would not hesitate to pretend to be weak and naive. After all, it was worth waiting just a little longer. Soon Titty would clear her way, forcing His Majesty to break with the Empress. In the darkness of the bedroom, they surrendered to the night. On the third day of the celebration, although the hall was full of noisy guests, Empress Sepia felt strangely lonely. She mentally noted that there were many state matters awaiting her, and she decided to stay only a short time, and then quietly leave. Roxanne was absent. For a moment the woman wondered if it really mattered, but then she firmly pushed the thought away. Suddenly her title was heard. An unfamiliar male loudly called out to the mistress. The young man, radiating undisguised joy at the meeting, suggested dancing. If Her Highness doesn't mind. But before she could say a word, another man ran up. Loudly, almost defiantly, declaring that it was he she would dance with. Then a third exclaimed that the dance belonged to him, as the son of a count with a higher title. The Empress was deeply surprised and frankly indignant at such unheard of and impudent behavior. Suddenly she heard whispers of rumors from the young ladies. Sepia clearly understood their meaning. Reliable gossip claimed that different men came to the Empress's chambers every night. The ladies around couldn't believe what they were hearing, whispering in surprise. But Titty stood nearby, a faint, satisfied smile frozen on her face. The day before, in her luxurious chambers, she was preparing for the evening with the help of a devoted maid. The assistant, carefully examining the lady, noticed with concern that she looked unimportant, and she asked anxiously what had happened. Titty, with an embarrassed, innocent expression on her face, leaned over and whispered in her ear, as if sharing her most intimate secrets, that Her Majesty summoned different men to her every night. The maid was stunned by what she heard, her eyes widening in shock. But the lady, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone, emphasized that it was a huge secret, and therefore asked not to tell anyone. Suddenly, Titty abruptly stopped the insidious whispering. She asked decisively if they had any proof of their rumors, and she ordered that it was better not to spread such gossip without any basis. After all, the Empress would be extremely unpleasant to hear it. One of the young ladies, expressing feigned regret and shame that she had not thought of it before, hastened to remark on the lady's noble kindness. The concubine boldly suggested that the truth of the rumors would benefit Her Highness, so that she would not feel lonely because of her. Hearing those words, Sepia was not just shocked. She was filled with deep indignation at such boundless audacity. Suddenly, a huge uproar broke out in the hall. One of the men present began to swear and roughly pushed the young Betty of the Empress who was passing by. The mistress, without hesitation, rushed to help the girl up. Her face expressed genuine concern as she asked if she was okay. The young man, whose eyes burned with undisguised arrogance, began to shout at Betty not to stand in the middle of the road like a statue blocking the way. Standing up to her full height, Sepia, with her inherent dignity, emphasized that he had allowed himself to push her lady-in-waiting. Nakaba, outraged by the woman's words, asked in surprise, "Was that girl really a lady-in-waiting to the Empress?" Then, with a hint of a challenge, he decided to introduce himself. His name was Gallard Louvre, and he was the older brother of Titi herself. The mistress's order, pronounced with dignity, was that the man should first immediately apologize to her assistant. However, the impudent man ignored Her Highness. With a wry smile, he alluded to rumors of men's nocturnal visits to Her Majesty's chambers. Moreover, he boldly emphasized that if she invited him even once, he was deeply convinced that the young man would become irreplaceable for her. Sepia, whose voice was filled with cold determination, said that she would not forget his insulting words and insolent act, and turned to leave. The boy, in a panic, tried to convince her that she shouldn't do that at all, and he stretched out his hand, trying to grab Her Majesty to stop her. Suddenly, a strong man's hand like a vice gripped him, and he screamed in sharp pain. Roxanne had been squeezing her too tightly. The Lord emphasized firmly and authoritatively that he had behaved in the most impolite manner. Then he rudely pushed him towards the exit and ordered him to leave immediately. The noise in the hall subsided, and the guests were as amazed as the Empress, who was surprised and relieved to see Roxanne. The man quickly approached her to make sure that everything was okay with Her Highness. He anxiously reported on the strange, unpleasant rumors in the city. She lowered her head as if burdened by an invisible guilt, and Sepia quietly assured him that her actions would silence the gossip. However, the Lord was clearly unsure. He explained that widespread rumors gain strength and attract bold insolence. The mistress stood speechless, not knowing how to respond. Then Roxanne, carefully but firmly embracing her slender waist, whispered a proposal, which made Sepia gasp in astonishment. He suggested she use it. She was stunned, her gaze frozen in mute question. The Lord leaned even closer, almost touching her ear with his lips, and whispered that he was truly ready to become her lover. The surprised woman did not understand. Roxanne hastened to explain that it would only appear that way to the world. He added confidently that it would not happen to him again. The Emperor was approaching them rapidly. His gaze was stern and piercing. His mere appearance and Her Highness, without any doubt, accepted the proposal. Then Lord, calling her Sepia for the first time in a long time, suggested they go for a walk. She was shocked to the core because she had heard her name so rarely. Meanwhile, seeing the two of them standing so close together, Dionysus seemed to boil with rage. His face was distorted by a grimace of madness. Outside, it was a starry evening, illuminated by a beautiful moon. Roxanne and the mistress were strolling leisurely through the garden. Sepia looked around in surprise, not understanding why he had brought her to that secluded place. The Lord, noticing her confusion, calmly reassured her that the night garden, the original place for secret rendezvous between lovers. She couldn't understand whether such behavior was really acceptable to the Empress. The man noticed the pensive look on Her Majesty's face. With a soft smile, he turned to her, asking what her thoughts were wandering about. Sepia asked directly without a shadow of hesitation. Did Roxanne have a lover? And added if true, such help would be disrespectful to the girl's feelings. But the man, noticing her concern, assured her that she really shouldn't worry. He admitted that he once had a lover, whom he still loved. However, inexorable circumstances separated them, and so many years had passed since then that it seemed too late to dare to look for her again. The surprised Empress warmly assured him that his beloved had also been waiting for him, despite everything. Sepia's simple but profound thought pierced the Lord to the very heart. Suddenly, the silence of the night garden was broken by muffled sounds. Somewhere very close in the shadows, a couple was hugging and kissing. The mistress felt a pang of embarrassment burn her cheeks, catching her unawares. Suddenly, Roxanne pressed Her Highness firmly, almost imperiously, against him. His voice, hoarse from the proximity, announced that this was the perfect place for the rumors they needed to spread. Sepia felt a hot wave of shame spread across her face. He leaned even closer, his breath tickling the woman's nose. The man assured them that they too should not lag behind that idyll, thereby strengthening their own legend. The Lord moved closer to her. Almost in a whisper, he asked Her Highness to stand there for just a moment. For Sepia, who had kept her personal distance all her life, this closeness was unusual, almost defiantly intimate. Nearby, hidden in the shadows, they were spotted by a young couple. Their faces contorted in surprise as they recognized the Empress and Duke Claude. It was at that moment that Her Highness realized with bitterness the insidiousness of the situation. Roxanne had undoubtedly arranged everything on purpose. Now that they were seen together, rumors would spread like wildfire through the palace, consuming everything in its path. Having walked a few steps away, the Lord turned to the mistress with a slight smile and asked if she was cold. Sepia assured her that she was comfortable, but he didn't let go of her waist. Deep in thought, she couldn't figure out his intentions, whether it was a game or something more. Returning to the luxurious hall, they walked together, inseparable, hand in hand. As soon as they crossed the threshold, an uncontrollable commotion surrounded them. Those present, not hiding their surprise, began to discuss their appearance with great enthusiasm. In a moment, a new truth was established. Duke Claude was the Empress's lover. All the previous vile rumors about her nocturnal adventures vanished like smoke, proving to be slander. After all, as they whispered, the Duke would not allow such a disgrace. The mistress was quite clearly aware. Roxanne had played her part masterfully, and all eyes in the hall, as if by a magnet, were drawn to them. Feeling uncomfortable from the close attention, the woman suggested the Lord retreat to a more secluded place. The man immediately suggested the balcony. On the cozy terrace they found peace, sipping exquisite wine. Sepia sincerely thanked him for his help. Concerned that Roxanne had to go through unnecessary trouble because of her, he calmly assured her that it was his choice to help. Suddenly, a sharp question flashed through Her Highness's mind. Why was he providing her with such help if it was just a simple friendly favor? She felt that the situation could turn into serious complications, and unsure, she was about to ask when she suddenly heard Tiddy's voice. She hurriedly announced that His Majesty the Emperor had arrived, and casting a meaningful glance at him, she added that the Empress was heading for the terrace. Demios scornfully said that they had made no attempt to hide their relationship. The lady did not understand the need for concealment. The Emperor, full of irritation, reproached her for lacking the pride worthy of Her Highness, and accused her of wanting Claude to receive her name. The woman tried to explain that she was only trying to dispel the vile rumors that were spreading about her. He was outraged by her cynical use of the Duke. Roxanne resolutely intervened in the conversation, assuring that he was the first to offer Her Majesty his help. His intervention, he assured, would put an end to the humiliation of the Empress. The man then advised the ruler to pay attention to another source of gossip, giving Tiddy a warning look about a possible worse rumor. She visibly flinched with alarm, and immediately suggested to His Majesty to move to another place, supposedly because of the sudden cold. The Emperor agreed, casting a final glance at Sepia. He told the woman to remember one thing: anyone who associated with the Duke would inevitably meet their doom. With these prophetic words, he left them alone. Her Highness was stunned by his ominous warning. Roxanne, bowing suddenly, quietly asked permission to go first. Looking at him, she realized with bitterness that it was because of her that he had to listen to such humiliating accusations. With a heavy heart, without protest, Her Highness nodded in agreement. Sepia felt unbearably sorry for that incident. A few days later, in the Empress's chambers, Madame was carefully combing Sepia's hair. While she was constantly thinking about the Emperor's words, not understanding their meaning, the Queen turned to Madame Remedy, who had lived at court for a long time, asking about the past. Madame confirmed her deep knowledge of court intrigues, explaining that her mother had served as a lady-in-waiting to Her Highness the Princess. So she had known all the secrets since childhood. Then Sepia noticed that the lady obviously remembered well what Duke Claude had been like in the past. Suddenly, Madame became alert, and her gaze, darkened by thought, foreshadowed something important. She solemnly announced that she had something to tell. She noted that the Duke had now returned as a hero. But once, in his distant childhood, he had been just an unhappy boy, shrouded in a cloud of gloomy rumors. The madam then asked if Her Majesty knew that the previous emperor had an older brother. the mighty Red King Laximus. Claude Leophore was his son. She added that the Red King, the rightful heir, had abdicated the throne to his younger brother Gililuder. The birth of the young duke caused the former Empress Urdiola deep anxiety, which quickly grew into undisguised fears. One fateful day, young Claude contracted a strange, inexplicable illness. That unfortunate incident instantly led to the removal of Laximus from the throne. His entire family, including the heir to the sacred beast, found themselves under relentless surveillance. Madame assured Sepia that the Red King and his wife were extremely cautious about the disease. They knew that the treacherous empress was looking for a reason to accuse them. However, to their great regret, both died from a terrible plague. Shocked by the tragic news, Her Highness anxiously asked what had happened to Roxanne. The lady allayed her concerns. Ramodi explained that fortunately the young man had returned from abroad shortly before the outbreak, and miraculously he avoided infection. However, the miraculous rescue itself turned out to be his worst test. The inhabitants of his possessions were amazed that the disease had escaped him, and they began to suspect him of something sinister, which gave rise to a deep and irresistible distrust. In addition, terrible rumors spread. It was said that he brought famine and disease with him. It was even rumored that the descendant of the sacred beast was cursed. Sepia angrily dismissed the slander as baseless. Worse still, the gossip about his chambers became the terrible truth after the maid confirmed it. The words spoken by Demios on the balcony echoed in the mind of the mistress. However, the madam was unwavering in her conviction that the duke could not do such a thing. After all, someone was deliberately slandering him. The empress, fully sharing her opinion, sincerely thanked the lady for her frank story. The woman, with a faint smile, noted that it was important for Her Highness to learn the truth, regardless of the true nature of her relationship with the duke. The embarrassed empress immediately rushed to deny it, assuring that there was nothing between her and Claude that could cause concern. The lady undoubtedly understood everything, and assured me that under any circumstances she would always stand by the mistress's side, unwaveringly. Sepia, however, was not going to back down from her insistence, until suddenly Soroka's assistant entered the room. She announced an unexpected visitor for Her Majesty. The woman froze in surprise when she heard a deep male voice, who insisted on giving him a few minutes of attention. It was none other than Roxanne herself, and his sudden appearance struck her to the core. In a room shrouded in silence, the Empress received Roxanne. Sitting face to face, Sepia reflected on the hardships of his childhood. With a slight smile touching his lips, the man noted that the woman's too close gaze could cause him to misunderstand her. Her Highness apologized sheepishly, admitting that she had not understood the subtleties of the hint. The Lord, smiling calmly, assured her that he had meant no such thing. To start the conversation, Sepia asked him about his tea preferences. He wanted to try black Bremen if they had any in stock. A moment later, a fragrant drink appeared before them. The Empress noted the unusualness of the Lord's choice, as that variety, as was known, was not to everyone's liking. Roxanne sincerely assured that this tea was his beloved's favorite. Her Highness was surprised by the incredible coincidence. Bremen was also her favorite. So without delay, she asked about the purpose of his visit that day. The man, somewhat embarrassed, voiced his request. He wanted to borrow a map of the imperial palace. Upon hearing this, the queen was astonished and immediately asked why he needed it. Roxanne solemnly announced her desire to find the inheritance left in the palace by her biological father. The woman understood instantly. If it was a biological father, it was undoubtedly the Red King Laximus, the one Madame Remedy had mentioned. She sensed that there was a good reason behind his search. Realizing the depth of his intentions, the Empress willingly agreed to borrow the map. The Lord was deeply grateful, assuring her that he would report to her every Sunday about the preservation. Sepia confidently assured her that there was no need for such concern. However, he added with a slight smile that reporting would be a great excuse for him to see her at least once a week. The mistress blushed slightly. The husband, seeing the heavy snowfall outside the window, delicately suggested that she take a short walk. They walked leisurely through the snow-covered garden. The Lord, overcome with concern, asked if the Empress felt the cold. She assured him of her complete comfort. She also added that she enjoyed the walk immensely. Looking at him, Sepia wondered if Roxanne's words meant a hidden desire to continue their meetings. She was about to ask, when suddenly he pointed with his hand, directing the mistress's gaze to the little fox cub, which immediately caught her eye. Her Highness was surprised by a fox in the palace garden. She thought it was a beast man, but adults rarely appeared in such a form. She noticed that the fox was eager for affection, so she went up and gently stroked its head. It seemed to her extremely cute. Sepia thought that someone must have raised the fox and it had gotten lost. After all, the animal got along so well with people. Roxanne, seeing this, agreed that the beast was tame, and he stretched out his hand towards it, but it immediately hissed, not letting him near. It seemed to the Lord that he did not get along well with everyone, and perhaps only the Empress was an exception for him. He assumed that the furry little one had mistaken him for a rival. After all, it was most likely a male. The Empress could barely contain her laughter when she heard about their bizarre rivalry. After all, the fox seemed so touchingly cute to her. The pretendedly saddened Lord remarked that Her Highness's heart was inclined towards the fox cub more than towards him. She playfully assured him that he shouldn't say such things, but still continued to pet the little animal. However, as soon as the man tried to approach, the fox suddenly howled loudly, as if in protest, and immediately ran away. As he shook hands with Sepia, he triumphantly declared that he had not intended to do so. However, his rival had decided to step out of the way. The mistress, rising with his help, noticed a playful glint in his eyes. Then Roxanne looked at her thoughtfully, and I asked if Her Majesty knew that feelings of jealousy could arise even between two people, and even more so between friends. With a smile touching her lips, the mistress noted that the man seemed to be jealous of the fox cub. He confirmed without hesitation that he was not just a little jealous, and he added very strongly that he wished her to prefer him above all else. Those words caused a bright blush to flood the Empress's face. The Lord, holding Her Majesty's hand tightly, stood motionless beside her, and they both froze in the middle of the silent, snow-covered garden. Meanwhile, at the Crudio mansion, Atensil was stunned by his own transformation. He boasted to his elder with excessive joy that he was human. His brother, General Jesper Crudio of the Imperial Army, angrily assured him that he had seen everything, but insisted on immediate clothing. The man understood the young man's boundless joy. However, several hours had passed since his transformation, and he still could not calm down. The guy was indignant not just at his own happiness, but because others had the gift of reincarnation from birth, while he was destined to wait for 20 years. He remained that damned fox all his life, and complained in despair that his brother was unable to even slightly comprehend the depth of his suffering. Jesper, softening his tone with an apology, still ventured to ask again. Was his brother going to bring up the subject of the Empress again? Atensil passionately asserted that it was her touch that had helped him transform. However, his older brother categorically rejected these claims as complete nonsense. The young man explained with enthusiasm that this was exactly what had happened. He had tried all the known medicines, holy water, and ancient beliefs, but nothing had worked. But as soon as Her Majesty touched him, a miracle happened. The exhausted man had difficulty believing in the unwavering sincerity of his brother's convictions. Atensil, not understanding his skepticism, fervently assured him that there was no reason for doubt. After all, the ruler, the star, was Ishtar. The boy was healed by her touch, which was what his fate had brought him. The young man smugly admired his own beauty, calling himself handsome. He involuntarily imagined that he might even interest Her Majesty. The elder brother barely contained his irritation, and he advised him not to make fun of her. After all, the woman had an emperor and a duke, and therefore he could not possibly be of any interest to her. However, Atensil did not heed his brother's words, and he pictured in his imagination how the name of the Empress would shine on him. He recalled the rumors that even the ruler's concubine had received a title because of her name, and he exclaimed that true fate had befallen him. Jesper kept repeating that the Empress was only mortal and no name would appear on her. However, the young man assured him that no one could know for sure. After all, Her Majesty the Star Ishtar was born by fate from a beastman. However, as soon as he smelled that familiar scent, everything instantly fell into place, and the young man felt that he was ready to fight for her with that male. However, his older brother remained completely confused. The boy turned to him with one request. When he went to the palace, he should take him with him. He wanted to show the Empress his human form. One day, Sepia and the Lord engaged in a silent battle behind the chessboard. She held her breath as she watched the Lord's tense brow. He was considering his next move. A faint smile played on her lips. A moment later, the mistress announced her decisive move. Victory was on her side. With a sigh, Roxanne admitted another defeat. But there was a playful note in his voice as he asked for a handicap in the next game. The request for preference surprised the Empress. After all, the Lord found countless occasions for meetings, invariably mentioning the lost map. She wondered how many more times he would use that maneuver. The woman cautiously asked if he would return to the family estate after receiving his inheritance. Roxanne replied that it was most likely so. The lady wondered about the fate of the inhabitants of Leofor, who had unjustly accused him of spreading the disease. Will he be able to return home and find peace? Sepia cautiously noted that she had heard about the tragedy in Leofor, suggesting that he might have been the victim of a conspiracy. Her words deeply affected the man. He was about to respond when suddenly the silence of the room was broken by a persistent knock on the door. Madame Remedy entered the room, announcing to Her Majesty the Emperor's arrival. The woman was surprised by this surprise. She asked him to tell her to wait a bit. However, before Madame could return, Demios was already standing behind her. He coldly remarked that such a mature woman as Remody could not have simply shown such a picture. The Lord was clearly not in the best of humor. After all, their words came back to his memory, that everything had been done to cover up one rumor with another. Although it seemed to him that everything was completely different, Sepia calmly explained that they were just playing chess. He sarcastically asked if playing was the only thing they had planned. The Empress flatly objected and asked about his visit. He feigned indifference and replied that he did not consider it necessary to have an occasion to meet his wife. Turning to Roxanne, Her Highness apologized and asked him to leave her chambers. Bowing, the Lord left the room without any resistance. In passing, the man met the Emperor's gaze. He gave him a quick but piercing look. Following him, the mistress emphasized the upcoming meeting with the Lord. She explained to Demios that their conversation with Roxanne had been planned. The woman understood that his visits would not stop, but she assured him that she had good reasons for it. Her explanations seemed unconvincing to His Majesty. Irritated, Sepia pointed out that even her frequent meetings with the Duke took less time than his dates with his mistress, and she asked if the Lord was going to go to Titi after their conversation. In response, he only remained silent, looking at her with a stern look. Sepia continued to investigate the reason for his attitude towards her. With bitterness, she rhetorically asked if the relationship had become formal, especially after he got a mistress, and then he suddenly appears and acts like a man. Demios ignored her words, but he asked why the Duke. The woman didn't understand why it was so important to him, and he hated the Duke, believing that the reason was his past. The ruler realized that Her Highness obviously knew everything, but despite that, she kept him close. However, the woman firmly stated that she didn't believe the baseless accusations, and asked if His Majesty really believed that lie. Raising his voice, the man assured her that he was motivated only by concern for her. She emphasized that even the affair with the Duke had no relevance to his past. Sepia asked worriedly, shouldn't she just fulfill her duties as Empress just as he did his? His Majesty laughed bitterly, assuming that she could well have made the Duke her lover. Then he roughly grabbed her face with a large hand, and his eyes flashed bright red with anger. The Emperor emphasized the absence of true marital ties between them, reproaching the Empress for frequently forgetting his status as a husband. Sepia trembled, speechless. She felt a paralyzing fear. He insisted on an answer, resenting her silence, and he confidently declared the excessive gentleness of her character. After that, he threw her onto the sofa. The woman screamed in a faint voice, looking at him in horror. Sepia did not understand his desires. As he approached, the Emperor again emphasized the difference between a mistress and the Empress, his wife. Calming down, the man reached out his hand. He gently stroked her cheek, waiting for confirmation that she understood him. But Sepia did not back down, declaring that since the appearance of his mistress, any relationship between them had ceased. His Majesty was amused by her boldness, and he ordered her to continue speaking as she saw fit, reminding her that it was she who had first rejected him, remembering their wedding night, when the man gently touched her face, calling her name. Slowly removing the cape, he watched as the girl became embarrassed. Fear darkened Sepia's eyes, and she barely audibly apologized. Explaining her unpreparedness, the man stepped back, showing understanding and not insisting. The woman was surprised when Demios spoke of their wedding night 5 years ago. He could not understand the reason for her confused look, asking why she seemed so embarrassed. After all, he didn't think the Empress had forgotten about that special day. Her Highness looked down, lost in memories of that evening. She felt again her inability to accept his closeness, that instinctive refusal, the nature of which remained an unsolved mystery to her. The woman sat and remained silent. The man insisted that the birth of an heir to the throne was the empress's duty, which she constantly mentioned. The confused mistress could not find a response. He took her by the shoulders, reminding her of the 5 years that had passed since her refusal. Confused, Sepia said that if he needed intimacy, he could turn to Tidai. Those words made him furious, and he screamed, accusing her of treating him like an animal. With irony in his voice, Demios asked if the Duke knew that the Empress remained a virgin. He bent down and rested his knee on the sofa at her feet, causing the woman to shudder with fear. In a stern tone, the Lord ordered her to remember that he was her only husband. The Empress trembled, pushing his shoulders with her hands, trying in vain to push him away. Touching Sepia's face again gently, the man ran his hand down her neck. She begged him to stop, but the Emperor's gaze remained cruel and commanding. He spoke boldly, that there was nothing wrong with a man wanting to completely possess his wife, leaning almost close to her face, and adding to that he wondered if a woman's choice wasn't always her husband's. Sepia closed her eyes, mentally repeating her inability. Her Highness was seized with terror and her whole body trembled. He watched her with a faint smile, noticing her fright. Demios, without letting go of the woman, gave her advice. It would be good to weigh her imperial duties. Then he got up and left the room. Roxanne was waiting for him in the corridor. The Lord had not anticipated that meeting, and before he could recover, he felt a sharp blow to the face from the Lord. The enraged Emperor burst into a scream, calling him a fool, and asked Roxanne about the audacity to raise a hand against His Majesty. He emphasized that the man was destined to die far from his homeland. The Emperor demanded an explanation for his return. Roxanne calmly reminded him of his warning and his promise. Demios, gaining insolence, declared that the Lord would never become one, and the Empress will never remember him. His Majesty threw those words right in her face with a contemptuous smile. The next day, Sepia was strolling leisurely through her estate, accompanied by her maid of honor, Magpie. The girl noticed that the end of winter was approaching. She also noticed her mistress's worried look. The girl suggested that the reason for this was His Majesty's departure to the winter residence. The Magpie added that she also did not like the Emperor's behavior. The Queen asked her not to worry, assuring her that it was not important. Her thoughts were occupied by her husband's words about her evasion of imperial duty and her destiny to give birth to an heir. She couldn't imagine how much longer she could refuse him. Suddenly the maid of honor exclaimed, noticing the figures approaching them. From a distance she recognized General Jesper, and next to him she saw an unfamiliar young man. The commander and the young man greeted Her Majesty. The Empress remarked that she had not seen the general for a long time, and asked who his companion was. The boy introduced himself as Ettenzel, the second son of the Crudio family, and coming closer he expressed his great desire to meet her. A confused Sepia greeted him, thinking it was their first time meeting. Jesper explained that his brother wanted to see the palace, that he had decided to keep him company. Besides, the general wanted to apologize for the incident at the celebration. Sepia remembered the incident with the son of the Louvre family. There was also talk of his release on a large bail. Her Highness wondered who had paid the expenses, Titi or His Majesty. The Empress assured him that everything was fine, since it was not his fault. However, Jesper felt responsible for the safety of the event. He considered it necessary to apologize to the Empress and her maid of honor. Magpie blushed, but to the Empress's noticeable smile, she assured him that everything was fine. Her Highness asked the young man the purpose of his visit to the palace. He told her that he was looking for his fox, which had been seen in the imperial garden. Sepia remembered the red fox cub she had seen, and was surprised to learn that it belonged to Ettenzel. She noted that the beast had not been seen recently, and the woman began to worry. The boy suggested that Her Majesty search for the animal together. The mistress was confused, but in the end she agreed. During the walk, Ettenzel asked if the Empress had been looking after his fox the whole time. She corrected him that she had only seen the animal a few times, and she asked about the circumstances of the fox cub's disappearance. The young man quickly made up a story about the fox's sudden disappearance, about their futile search throughout the estate, and the assumption that he could have hidden in his brother's carriage, who was on his way to work. Sepia was surprised to note that this was the very spot where they had first encountered the fox. The boy agreed, calling it a perfect hideout. And looking at her, he added about his fox's special love for beautiful blue-eyed ladies. The woman did not understand his hint. Etensel, laughing, suggested that they continue their search. Soon they approached the bridge over the garden river, and the young man noticed the slippery road. So he extended his hand to the mistress. Sepia was confused, feeling disgusted by any male touch. Although her reaction had not been so strong before, she couldn't understand why Roxanne's touch hadn't caused such a rejection. The young man insisted, and the Empress reluctantly offered him her hand. The young man was surprised by the coldness of her palm, expressing concern about her condition. But Sepia assured her that everything was fine, and suggested they continue on their way. She thought that perhaps it was the unfamiliar touch that was making her tense. The road on the bridge was slippery and it was difficult to hold on to one. Caution could have helped her cross. But as soon as she took a step, she felt herself losing her balance and falling. Eatansel only watched helplessly as she fell. Suddenly a man appeared behind her. The Empress did not immediately understand who had saved her. The Lord remarked about being careful on the ice. She looked at him with surprised big blue eyes. A memory from her childhood flashed through her mind. When she and young Demios were walking through a snowy forest and almost stepped on ice, and he stopped her, warning her about the slippery surface. Looking at her savior, she first thought of the Emperor, but then she realized that before her was Roxanne. The husband expressed concern about her condition, to which the Empress assured him that she felt fine, although she was very surprised. She thought the advice to be careful on snowy roads was common knowledge, trying to stay calm. The Lord was surprised to see the son of House Crudio in the palace. The disgruntled young man explained that they were only looking for his fox. Roxanne insisted on searching on her own, considering the slippery surface that could be dangerous for Her Majesty. In response, Eatansel asked about the purpose of the Lord's visit to the palace, thereby causing him to laugh lightly. Approaching Sepia, he assured her that no special reason was needed for their meeting, adding that the young man was still too young to understand that. The boy became angry. Approaching the man, he insisted that he not be considered a child. The Empress turned to Eatansel. She announced the end of the search for the fox due to her scheduled meeting with the Duke. The young man bowed, expressed his understanding, and said goodbye and left. When they were left alone, the mistress asked Roxanne how he had learned of her presence in that remote corner of the garden. He explained that one of her ladies-in-waiting had informed him of this. Although he regretted interrupting her conversation with the general, the Empress thought that Betty had lost her mind because of him. The Lord, just in case, warned the woman against being too trusting of inexperienced men, hinting that innocent appearances could be deceiving. The lady did not understand his hint. He explained that in his opinion the young man wanted her friendship. Sepia smiled faintly, not sharing his thoughts. Meeting the woman's gaze, the Lord assured her that he had sought to be her only friend. Her Highness felt the need to express her doubts earlier, as some of the man's words might have been taken incorrectly. However, Roxanne assured her of his sincerity. Then Sepia remembered his lover, and asked if he had found the girl, immediately realizing his haste. Bowing his head, he announced that he had found her, but she was married. The Empress felt that she had touched on a sensitive subject, and embarrassed, did not know how to respond. Sighing, the Lord assured her that it was his fault, not hers. He added with elation that it would be necessary to check whether her husband was worthy of being her companion. Sepia was surprised by his words, but he assured her that it didn't matter because they were almost there. It was already getting dark, and he promised to show the map next time. On the threshold, the man advised her to return before dark, and kissing Her Highness's hand, he wished her good night. The woman replied in the same way. The king's bedroom was filled with intimacy. He was tenderly embracing his concubine, who was thanking him for the luxurious setting. He noticed her excessive gratitude, to which Titi replied that she appreciated his presence and the honor of bearing his name. The Emperor tenderly bared her shoulder and kissed the tattooed name. The girl reflected on the obvious gulf between the ruler and the Empress. After all, it was she, not his legal wife, who shared that evening with him. In his arms, the lady looked at the snowfall and remembered her poor past in the slums, where the snowy streets were dirty and the voices of the poor were full of complaints. Then she heard about the new Empress, who opened a shelter for the poor, distributing bread and water, bringing them joy. These memories contrasted with her current situation, and Titi accused Her Majesty of hypocrisy, rejecting thoughts of poverty and seeking to seize everything that belonged to the Empress. Hugging Demios tightly, she whispered about her boundless happiness and gratitude. He assured her that the lady had made his life beautiful and special. Titi looked at him with innocent eyes, asking him not to let his hatred of the Empress cloud their relationship, fearing unforeseen consequences. The Lord noticed the girl's anxiety about Sepia. Looking down, she quietly said that the Lord hated her, but the husband objected, believing that she did not hate the concubine but was simply incapable of loving anyone. After a silent pause, Titi announced the upcoming purification ritual and asked if she could go with him. The emperor was surprised by her desire, explaining that the sacred ceremony was only for the descendants of the sacred beasts, and only the emperor and empress participated in it. He also emphasized that only with divine permission could one enter the underground temple. The girl apologized sadly, explaining her jealousy. With a heavy sigh, she spoke of her desire to possess him alone. His Highness abruptly placed her on the bed, towering over her, assuring her that she had always given him pleasure. The man heard in response that he was the lady's happiness. In their embrace, they indulged in nightly passion. The next morning, Titi was finishing her toilet, admiring her reflection in the mirror when her maids unexpectedly announced a visitor. Approaching the door, she asked with displeasure about the unexpected guests. However, when she looked up, she was amazed. Before her stood a man in a black cloak, his face hidden in the shadow of his hood. Taking it off, the stranger asked if the name was still there. The very day arrived. The first ray of the new year touched the frozen earth, carrying the burden of an ancient ritual of purification. The Empress, wrapped in robes that seemed woven from moonlight, walked through the stony corridors of the palace. Her gait was slow, almost weightless. Demios's words still lingered in her mind, like needles of ice reminding her of her imperial duty. After that conversation, Sepia skillfully managed to avoid meeting the ruler. But that day, escape was impossible. Like two chirping birds, Magpie and his assistant circled side by side. Their voices enthusiastically sang the unearthly beauty of Her Majesty. They prophesied imminent good fortune, wealth, and the flourishing of the empire. The girl's words were warm. Sepia smiled, thanking them for their kindness. The ruler stood by the heavy doors leading to the underground sanctuary. His ritual attire, light and strict, only emphasized his commanding figure, but His Majesty's gaze was cold as a winter wind, and there was not a single shadow of yesterday's tenderness in it. He silently extended his hand. The gesture was not a request but an order. Sepia, sighing silently, slowly extended her hand. Their hands joined, and in the light of a flickering lantern they moved into the depths of darkness, where the fate of the empire for a whole year would be decided. The emperor and empress immersed themselves in the waters of the sacred lake. Then they spent the night in the temple, purifying themselves from defilement. Entering the water, the woman felt cold. After all, the water that penetrated the grotto was mixed with seawater. She pondered the vastness of the unknown sea. Demios, without taking his eyes off her, asked her what she thought, to which she replied that she was simply imagining the real sea. He was shocked to learn that she was not familiar with him. Sepia remembered a childhood promise to show her the coast, which her husband did not remember. Turning away, His Highness remarked that, provided she fulfilled her imperial duties, he could arrange for her to take several trips to the sea. The woman understood the hidden meaning of his words about duties. However, the internal struggle did not allow her to easily accept the proposed agreement. Suddenly, Demios screamed and grabbed his head, apparently in great pain. Then, unexpectedly, he completely submerged himself in the water. Frightened, she screamed, calling out his title, and rushed towards him. When she reached the shore, Sepia felt the heat radiating from the man's body. The sovereign came to his senses, and Her Highness tried to attract his attention. She was about to call the servants and asked him to wait. But as soon as she started to move, the emperor grabbed her hand, preventing her from leaving. He put his arms around her waist, hugged her tightly, and begged her to stay. Sepia tried to reassure him that it was dangerous to remain in this state, but he insisted that he was her husband. The bright red glint in his eyes held the mistress in icy terror. He waited for the woman to speak, but anxiety blocked her voice, causing a wave of irritation in him that quickly turned to anger. Suddenly he lunged at her, and Sepia found herself on the cold stone floor. A cry of terror escaped Her Highness's lips, begging the emperor to stop. In one terrifying moment, his hands were around her neck, cutting off her air. Demios's face twisted with rage. He held her neck tightly and insisted that she belonged to him. She whispered his name desperately, but he did not hear. Her Highness was seized by a primal horror at the bestial gleam in her husband's eyes. And again the imperious assertion of her belonging to him was heard. Only when the air in the woman's lungs was almost gone did the lord's grip loosen. He fainted again. Taking a convulsive breath, Sepia realized with horror how close death had been, and how he could have done this. In the morning, she helped him up, feeling how heavily he leaned on her. When asked how he was feeling, he assured her that he was able to walk, but there was a void in his eyes. The Emperor had absolutely no memory of the terrible events of the previous evening. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the sanctuary, Titi met them. Her face distorted with anxiety as she saw the haggard appearance of the ruler. His pallor could not go unnoticed, and running up, she touched his forehead, feeling the heat. The Empress reported his brief loss of consciousness in the temple. She hurriedly asked her assistant to immediately find the court physician. Suddenly, Demios's call rang through the air and he reached out his hand to her. The gesture sent a wave of terror through Sepia, and she instinctively touched her neck, where faint bruises reminded her of the recent danger. She unconsciously stepped back. His gaze was full of guilt. But suddenly, Titi's boisterous laughter cut through the tense silence. The Emperor succumbed to the cheerful mood, embracing her around the waist and imperiously declaring her his. Leaning her head against his shoulder, the lady confirmed his words, assuring him that from now on she would take care of him. At that moment, from under his furrowed brows, the ruler cast a fleeting glance at the Empress, in which Sepia read a silent accusation. She saw his true nature, the monster hiding under the mask of power. Turning away, Her Majesty stood silently, stunned. His Majesty's angry gaze, like a bolt of lightning, pierced her silence. Then he addressed his subjects. His words sounded like a gloomy prophecy that the new year would bring only misfortune. Those words struck the queen to her very heart. Deep shock was reflected in her eyes. After all, the fate of the empire for an entire year depended on the outcome of the purification ritual, which could unfold according to one of 5 scenarios. The greatest good luck was the glow of a special light in the temple, heralding great well-being and prosperity. Ordinary luck also promised prosperity. A neutral result indicated stability and peace in the empire. Misfortune warned of possible disasters that could strike the entire state. And the greatest misfortune foreshadowed wars, catastrophes, and crises on a national scale. The subjects froze and were speechless at the news they heard. Then their surprise and alarm merged into a low whisper. Since Sepia had ascended the throne, luck had always been their constant companion. What could have changed this time remained incomprehensible. The shocked concubine did not take her eyes off the Emperor. She asked if they should hurry to the temple because its appearance was alarming. He nodded in agreement, and they disappeared behind the heavy door. Her Highness silently followed them with her gaze, her thoughts filled with heavy forebodings. The lord in his office was absorbed in state affairs and the advice of his subordinates. He carefully studied the map of the imperial palace. The commander expressed his opinion about the futility of searching for the relics of the late king, comparing everything to looking for a needle in a haystack. Roxanne was aware of the complexity of the task, but insisted on continuing the search. Her subordinates accepted the order. The tired man thought about the endless search. However, he felt a duty to find his father's relics, for which he had returned to the capital. He remembered his childhood, his father on his deathbed, and his quiet but powerful story about the Black Curse. That one day he would ascend the divine beast with crimson eyes and destroy the empire. Those words deeply affected the boy. The father insisted on the need to find the eyes of the wolf and his companion, hidden in the capital, which were to become their protection. Little Roxanne listened intently to every word he said. He thought that the crimson eyes probably belonged to the current Emperor Demios. The lord inquired for news from the Empress's palace, but there was none. He sadly noted that it had been 2 weeks since the ritual since he had seen her. The subordinate tried to calm him down, suggesting that after the announcement of the disaster, the ruler was probably preoccupied with state affairs. But deep down, Roxanne knew the real reason for his longing. He simply longed to see her face again. Sepia worked tirelessly. In times of trouble, the state treasury needed significant funds. After all, the lowest strata of society suffered the most. She continued to carefully review the documents. At least that wasn't the biggest disaster. It was just that all the new projects had to be cancelled. Leaning back in her chair, she remembered again the terrible image of her master, who was strangling her. The words about belonging to him. She even physically felt the pressure on her neck. This frightened the woman, and she tried to drive away those thoughts. Suddenly, the assistant announced the arrival of His Majesty's servant and asked permission to let him in. Surprised by the unexpected visit at such an hour, The Empress allowed him to come in. The young man, entering the office, bowed and apologized for the late visit. Concerned, Sepia asked what had happened. The boy placed 2 envelopes on the table and announced the ruler's decrees prohibiting the creation of a charity department. Her Majesty was shocked and could not understand what it all meant. So she immediately decided to visit him. She was waiting for him in the living room. Entering the room, the man was surprised by the Empress's night visit. Covering his naked torso with a silk robe. Standing up, she indignantly protested against the ban on creating a charity department, completely not understanding his action. Demio snorted indifferently, considering it a trifle. The woman continued to be indignant, emphasizing the importance of charity. His gaze fell on her. He thought that the Empress had only come to him to care for the common people in difficult times. The ruler laughed and clapped his hands, admiring her noble heart and truly imperial disposition. Sepia looked at him in anger, understanding his intention to humiliate her. Emphasizing his respect, he declared how the ruler sought to facilitate her oblivion. Her Highness could not understand his words. The man announced that he had transferred the budget allocated for charity to Tita. Shock ran through the woman and she exclaimed, struck by the absurdity of the situation. After all, the plan had been approved. For what reasons should the budget have been transferred to the concubine? With a cheeky smile, he replied that he had taken care of the lady. Since the mistress had so many worries, he decided to entrust the charity budget to her. Rage boiled in the queen's chest and she burst out in a scream. But Demios's commanding voice bound her like an icy wave, a stern reminder that in the face of the threat of empire, the weak must yield. She was struck by the cynical justification of human sacrifice. Her Majesty's mind refused to accept that reality. How could such a heartless creature hold the fate of an entire empire in her hands? Funds that could have been a salvation for many were to be wasted on luxury and the maintenance of his mistress. The idea seemed absurd to Sepia. He indifferently remarked that he would not interfere with her personal charity. Depressed, the Empress was aware of his hostility. But it was also his people, not just hers. And the duty to care for him lay with the entire imperial family. In response, the woman heard a cold accusation of her own contempt for him. Overwhelmed with anger, the Empress made a firm promise that funds for Titi will be allocated separately, insisting on the cancellation of the decree on the transfer of the budget. But she assured me that she would do everything possible to provide the amount that would satisfy the concubine as soon as possible. Suddenly, the lord's hands gripped her waist tightly, pulling her close. His hoarse whisper pierced the air as if that weren't enough. If she wanted to get what she wanted, she should start by doing her duty. Sepia felt a mixture of shock, depression, and deep humiliation. In his red gaze, the Empress saw her own distorted reflection. The man's last words almost touched her lips. They were an unequivocal offer of a deal. The Emperor was waiting for her to visit his bedchamber if she was willing to accept his terms. Late on a winter night, Sepia returned to her castle, her thoughts racing with memories of her visit to the Emperor and his proposed deal. Every word he said rang true. He noted that he had not expected consent that evening, but he warned that the woman's next late visit would mean accepting the terms. Her Highness thought that she could save the poor by fulfilling his demands. However, fear gripped the heart of the queen. Suddenly, her tears were wiped away by someone's gentle hands. Roxanne stood before her. Surprised by his sudden appearance, she realized with regret that because of her own experiences, she did not notice his arrival. The depressed Empress heard the soothing words of the Lord. He assured her that everything would be fine and allowed her to cry freely. Surprised, Sepia let her tears flow directly onto his chest. In the office, Roxanne offered her jasmine tea and she thanked him, feeling regretful for the weakness she had allowed to show in his arms. The man apologized with a gentle smile for the crampedness of the room. The Empress noticed that it was clean, strict, and organized. That's how she saw Roxanne himself, feeling an unusual warmth and peace in his presence. The man never took his admiring gaze from her. He gently addressed Sepia, assuring her that she could share any worries, big or small, with him. After all, he was always ready to help because they were friends. The woman hesitated, her heart yearning to confide in Roxanne, to tell her everything, and find solace. But she didn't dare burden him with her problems. With a bitter smile, she assured him that it was just winter melancholy and that she was fine. However, Roxanne did not take her penetrating gaze from her Highness. The candle was burning down on the table, and the warmth of the cup in her hands suggested a thought. It was time to say goodbye and say goodbye. But for some reason, the mistress did not want to leave. Silence fell between them. which was later broken by Roxanne's suggestion to play a little game that interested the woman. He explained that they would take turns sharing their secrets. The game surprised Sepia. After all, she and Demios often played like this when they were children. Is it really such a popular pastime in the animal kingdom? The man suggested starting first, and he told how he had lost some of his memories, which was why he could not fulfill his promise and reunite with his beloved. Touched, Her Highness inquired about his well-being. Nervously wringing his hands, he assured her that he was feeling better, although the time lost to recover his memory left behind only a bitter feeling of guilt. Hiding his gaze, the man finished his story. Listening intently and studying his face, Sepia realized it was her turn. Looking at her reflection in the teacup, she confessed that the closest person arouses in her a fear stronger than that caused by strangers. The Lord thanked her for her frankness. A slight smile lit up Her Highness's face, assuring her that it was she who felt grateful for his support. 7 days later, the imperial carriage smoothly stopped at a magnificent estate. The queen stepped out of its doors where a respectable gentleman was waiting. Viscount Elon, the manager of the Livrens Asylum, whose goat family belonged to the Beastmen. He respectfully greeted Her Majesty, and she immediately asked if everyone was present. The man assured her that 8 governors from different parts of the empire had gathered in the hall. The atmosphere was tense around the long, massive table, with one man arguing passionately that his district was the one that had suffered the most. His words provoked a sharp reaction from the manager from another province, as their water supplies were due to run out the next morning. A heated argument broke out among those present, with everyone trying to prove that their area had the most poor or sick people. As if petty personal grievances had clouded their understanding of the common calamity, a sharp blow on the table silenced the noisy argument. The governor, raising his voice, called for silence and gestured for the Empress to speak. She assured him that every district was equally important to her. The queen asked them to remain calm. Everyone felt embarrassed by their behavior and hurried to apologize to Her Majesty. Then the Empress's gaze fell on the Viscount. She asked about the state of their supplies. Delving into his notes, he reported, which, under the strictest economy, would only last for 2 weeks. Moreover, orphanages required special vigilance. Anxiety gripped Sepia's heart. The reality turned out to be much worse. The needy were increasing, but finances were not increasing. The worried administrators turned to the Empress for further action. She ordered that supplies for the orphanages be maintained, and in other areas, introduce strict reductions in food rations. This decision caused discontent among those present. However, a thought has arisen in Her Majesty's mind, that a true solution to the problem is possible only after meeting with Demios. After much internal hesitation, Sepia felt an unwavering resolve. Confidence rang in her voice as she reassured the bewildered audience that they shouldn't lose hope because she had a plan. A sudden loud crash outside made everyone look around in surprise. They went out into the yard and froze, shocked by what they saw. Numerous carts were lined up in front of the estate, from which soldiers were unloading large barrels and boxes. The surprised Empress asked the Viscount about the origin of the cargo, but he denied any involvement. The mystery of what was happening enveloped everything around her. At that very moment, the commander of Roxanne's squad appeared before her, greeting Her Majesty. Sepia recognized the familiar faces of the Lord's Knights, but their appearance remained a mystery to her. Suddenly, the door of one of the carriages opened, and Roxanne himself emerged from it, heading straight for the mistress. The woman froze in surprise, stunned by his presence. Her Highness's surprise turned into a question about the reason for his visit to their estate. In a calm tone, he explained. He had come to pay the rent, but those words embarrassed the Empress. Putting his hand on his chest, he recalled the Western Palace, kindly granted by Her Majesty to his knights. Sepia confirmed that fact, emphasizing the expression of gratitude to the heroes who gave their lives for the Empire. The commander of the knights firmly declared that they were not the kind of people who took advantage of other people's kindness, and his words found support among the others. The Empress assured her that everything was fine. Suddenly, Roxanne approached and quietly offered to speak privately, as a representative of charity and patronage. As she led him to one of the storerooms, Her Highness apologized for the modesty of the setting. But the Lord merely waved her hand. She got straight to the point, asking them to honestly explain what kind of cargo of supplies they were unloading on the street. The man assured him that these were all ordinary donations. After all, for an aristocrat, helping the needy is a duty. He also reminded her that she had accepted help from other noble families many times before. Looking at his calm face, Sepia realized that in peacetime this would have been a normal, even joyful event, if not for the Emperor's recent ban on any charitable initiatives. She remarked with concern in her voice. If Roxanne decided to help her, it could cause conflict with the Emperor. Bowing his head, he spoke. If everything worried the Queen so much, then there was no way for him to reconcile with His Majesty. He could not reveal all the details, but he hinted that there were good reasons why he could not leave the capital, and the Emperor could not banish him. The words about no way back and his mysterious hints intrigued Sepia. His hand lightly touched her hair, and the Lord noticed that it was covered with ice crystals. The woman remembered the snowfall she had been in. Their eyes met in silence. Suddenly, Roxanne took a letter from her bosom. He handed it to her and asked her to accept his donation. Opening the letter, the shocked mistress exclaimed about the excessive amount, but the husband objected, considering donations always appropriate. Looking at the amount indicated in the document, anyone would understand that it was a huge amount of money. Enough for 3 years of continuous charitable activity. The Lord added that the donation included contributions from his knights, whose disappointment would be profound if the Empress refused. Therefore, he persistently asked her to accept the gift. Looking at him, Sepia could not help but recall the timely support in the most difficult moments, like a loyal friend. Her Highness was tormented by the question of whether his actions were truly dictated solely by friendship. As she signed the document, she expressed her great gratitude. The man immediately asked if he could ask her a favor. The woman waited attentively. He asked her to value herself. Surprised, she froze in anticipation. Roxanne explained that if she needed his help to achieve this, she should not hesitate. Sepia looked at the Lord with her large blue eyes with a mute question, and a silence hung between them, full of unspeakable words. In the Grand Imperial Hall, Demios and his subordinates gathered, reporting on state affairs. The ruler sat deep in thought, and one of the subordinates whispered to another that His Majesty seemed not to be in the best of moods. The other reassured him that everything would be fine. After all, Duke Claude donated significant sums to the department that the Emperor sought to close. Then he publicly declared his charity together with the Empress. Inspired by his example, the nobles also began to make sacrifices, no longer fearing the Emperor's disapproval. In addition, rumors spread that His Highness had given the entire budget of the charity department to his mistress, which caused a wave of condemnation among the people. The assistant who managed the budget completed her report, hinting at the possibility of concluding the discussion of the budget for the current year. Suddenly, Demios crushed the wineglass in his hand, frightening everyone present. He clenched his fist tightly, which contained the shards, and injured himself. Everyone was stunned, asking how he was doing. With a serious look, he announced the end of the meeting. Leaving the conference room, the man headed to his chambers, where Titi was waiting for him, frightened by the sight of his injured hand. At that moment, Sepia suddenly appeared and found them together. Demios asked if she was happy now. She did not understand what was going on. After all, he was the first to start blackmailing her. Imperial duty is certainly important, but taking advantage of a suffering people was unacceptable. The Lord added displeasedly that Her Highness's desire to preserve the charity department at the cost of humiliating Titi was unworthy. Sepia was silent, as if the rumors about the charity budget being transferred to his lover had been confirmed. He, clutching his bloodied hand, angrily asked about the source of the gossip. However, the woman sincerely did not know about the discontent of his favorite, assuring that she was too busy to spread such rumors. His Highness remained silent, so the Empress announced that if he had nothing more to say, it was time for her to leave, having apologized. The Emperor watched her silently. Lady Titi also watched him guiltily without saying a word. As the children surrounded her, Sepia heard a barrage of questions about her incredible beauty, comparisons to a goddess, and the delicate scent of flowers that supposedly emanated from her. One girl handed Her Majesty a delicious cookie. The woman thanked her and happily ate the treat, feeling warm in her heart that the children were not hungry. The tables covered with delicious food and sweets were the best reward for her. Roxanne stood outside the window, watching the touching scene. The man was talking to the steward, the Viscount, and he imperceptibly pointed to the window, inviting her to come out for a moment. Sepia noticed the gesture and was pleasantly surprised. Late in the evening, the two of them strolled along the alley. The mistress once again expressed her gratitude to Roxanne for the sincere joy he had given the children. After all, she hadn't seen anyone like that in a long time. Her husband, in turn, was glad he could help. She also added that the Lord supported her like a true friend. Then she asked how she could repay him. The man was silent for a moment, then asked if she really believed that the help was dictated solely by friendship. Sepia raised her large blue eyes to him, and their gazes met in silent understanding. A tense, unexpected silence fell between them. The Lord declared that there was no man who would help a woman without a reason. Kissing her hand, he solemnly declared. He wanted to be everything to her, calling her by her name. Confused, Sepia realized that perhaps she had always known about his feelings, as well as her own. However, the lady withdrew her hand and declared that she could not accept it. The husband was disappointed when he heard Her Highness's refusal. In Sepia's opinion, as a perfect empress, mother of the empire, she had to protect higher values. And outside of those roles, in her opinion, she had no other value. Then the Lord declared that he would wait for her, not as an empress but as Sepia. The woman, blushing, could not understand whether he could read her thoughts. Roxanne, without looking away, assured her that she would forever remain in his heart by his own will, desperately begging her not to push him away. The worried magpie expressed her concerns to the empress, that Her Majesty had been working too hard lately and had been skipping meals for several days. Sepia assured her that everything was fine and sighed. It was really hard for her, but as soon as she stopped, that moment and Roxanne's words immediately flashed through her mind. Suddenly, another assistant entered the office. She announced the arrival of Baroness Swan. The mistress was surprised. When she went out to visit, she met the guest, the Baroness, a swan. The woman asked with curiosity about Her Majesty's well-being. Sepia noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. The Baroness expressed her gratitude for the time, as her visit was not without reason. She handed the Empress a piece of paper. Unfolding it, the Empress was shocked, not expecting such a significant donation. Swanee declared that the money had no meaning for her. It would not be needed in the grave. The Empress asked her not to say that, reassuring the lady. But the Baroness, laughing, assured him that it was true. She added that she had a special gratitude to Her Majesty, but Sepia did not understand why. The Baroness explained that the Reuven Palace had a special meaning for her. It was there that she served the late Empress until the end of her days. The mistress mentioned that Titier wanted to take possession of that palace. Sepia assured her that it was obvious. She could not allow anyone else to occupy the palace. Swanee declared that those who dared to encroach on such high places would one day pay. After all, she had always been on Her Majesty's side. The Queen noted that such large donations would be of great help to the people of the empire. But unfortunately, the Emperor was not very supportive of the projects she was organizing. With her head bowed, Sepia admitted that this bothered her. She said that for now her foundation is surviving on donations, but without an official budget, it's unclear how long it will last. Suddenly, the Baroness asked if it was necessary for Her Highness to receive His Majesty's approval. After all, she had more power than she thought. The mistress thought, was Swanee trying to humiliate Demios, or was it just a fantasy? Bowing, the woman announced that it was time for her to leave. At that moment, Madame Remedy froze in the doorway. She wanted to enter but did not. The Baroness thanked Her Majesty for the time she had given her. Sepia noticed her behind the door, not understanding why she was avoiding Swan. After the woman left, Madame came in to clean up and asked about the mistress's conversation. Her Highness assured her that everything had gone well, but she still noticed that something was bothering Remedy. The woman pretended that nothing had happened, but the Empress declared that she had seen her attempt to avoid meeting the Baroness, and asked her to tell her what was the matter. The distraught woman suddenly fell to the floor, begging the Empress to forgive her. She said that she really couldn't tell him about the Duke. Sepia tried to find out what exactly. Madame said that she believed the rumors that the young Duke had caused the illness by a demon, until the assistant revealed the truth. Sepia was surprised when Remody told her that her mother had seen the same circle in the dungeon of the late Empress's palace. The sign was mysterious to the mistress, but something began to dawn on her. Madame added that the rumors were created by the late Empress Yrdial. After all, it was all part of a plan to destroy the heir to the Red King. The next day, when the mother returned there, she encountered Swanee. She was coming out of the dungeon. It was empty, as if someone had hastily removed all traces. It must have been the Baroness who had destroyed all the evidence. The Empress finally understood why Remedy was pursuing the Baroness. The woman sat on the floor and cried. She admitted that she and her mother had been forced to remain silent for the sake of survival. And she begged for forgiveness for only speaking out now. Sepia, trying to calm her down, ordered her to get up, assuring her that she understood everything. However, a question was raging in her head. Why did the late Empress have to arrange that conspiracy with Swanee? If Demios had every chance of becoming emperor anyway. And if all that turns out to be true, then you should stay away from the Baroness, Sepia. After all, the woman was a loyal servant of the late Empress. Her Majesty was also not left behind by Swan's words about the Emperor's approval and her power, which was much greater than she herself had imagined. However, the mistress did not understand why she seemed more hostile to His Highness than to Roxanne. All the unsolved secrets were hers to unravel. In the living room, an unexpected guest was waiting for Titier, calmly drinking tea. She didn't expect to see him, but she smiled. He complimented her on her beautiful appearance. Suddenly, the lady's large eyes widened. A snake peeped out from the man's sleeve and hissed at her. With a slight smile, the guest asked the girl to sit down and asked how things were going with the Emperor. She carefully sat down on the sofa opposite. Titi, with a barely perceptible smile, radiated confidence, declaring that the ruler was completely absorbed in her. She assumed that his recent irritation was certainly caused by the Empress. However, her interlocutor warned that it was necessary to be alert. Emphasizing that without an heir, all the lady's efforts would be in vain, Titi assured her that she was not worried, firmly believing that she would give birth before the Empress. The man approved of her mood, adding that the birth of the Emperor's child would give the girl's status real weight. Suddenly memories flooded her, taking her back to the past, when she sold flowers on the snowy streets. It was then that she first heard the voice of the guest who had drawn attention to her beauty. The girl felt a slight fright, but he noticed her luxurious hair, which didn't fit into that poor environment, and he asked if she would like to become the Emperor's wife. The frightened young girl did not know what to say. Then he calmly invited her to come with him, calling her a beautiful white doe. Titi crouched down beside him, revealing her chest, on which the Emperor's name was engraved. As he removed his glove, the man noticed something. The writing quickly faded. He placed his hand on it, and a miracle happened before his eyes. The name regained its bright color and became clear. The monthly name tag application was a painful yet amazing ritual. The man, satisfied with the result, declared that everything was ready. The lady, buttoning her dress, expressed deep gratitude, promising to definitely give birth to a real child from the Emperor. He, putting on the glove, acknowledged her admirable aspiration, noting that he liked people who were true to their desires. Then, leaning down, the man whispered in Titi's ear to hurry to the Emperor while the power of the name was at its peak. She agreed with Mr. Blair. Late at night, as she approached the Emperor's chambers, the lady smelled a strange, unusual smell. As she entered the room, she tripped over something and fell. Looking at her hands, the girl saw that they were covered in blood. She was shocked and could not understand what had happened. Opening the curtains, Titi saw a dead doe in front of her, and then other animals. She did not understand what was happening there, and she began to scream. Turning around, the lady heard Demios's trembling voice. He was sitting on the floor in the corner of the bedroom, saying that he was not like that. The girl saw his half-transformation into a werewolf, and trying to figure out what had happened, she asked if His Majesty was okay. The Lord, looking up at her, began to shout, repeating that he was not like that. She understood that the man was afraid of condemnation. Approaching him, Titi hugged him and assured him that she believed His Majesty. After all, she had not seen anything. The concubine swore that she would always be on the Emperor's side and hugged him tightly. The man began to calm down. Titi declared that she would be his forever. In one of the courtyards, work was in full swing, with men tirelessly carrying large blocks for construction. Sepia watched, feeling relieved at the thought that they would have time to finish building the shelter by the beginning of summer. Suddenly, a lord approached her, not expecting to see her so early. He noted that they had not met for a long time. The woman was surprised by his appearance and instantly remembered their last meeting. After that evening, she had avoided him. Looking away, Her Highness announced that she had a lot of work to do. With a slight smile, the man assured her that he understood her. Sepia remembered the envelope. Handing it over, she announced an invitation to a charity event that she wanted to deliver to him personally. The man thanked her and asked if this was an offer to become her partner. The mistress blushed with surprise. Roxanne asked again, thinking he had made a mistake. But the Empress assured him that everything was correct. It was an invitation to be partners. Covering her flushed cheeks and hiding her embarrassed eyes, she was incredibly surprised by her own confusion. The Lord leaned towards her and quietly spoke of his joy at her reaction. Whispering in her ear, he meant that he was not indifferent to her. The man was very close. He even kissed her ear before walking away and saying that he would definitely come and pick her up. The stunned Sepia was shocked by his kiss, which she thought was accidental, and she could only utter words about the meeting. The day of the charity evening had arrived. The mansion was sparkling with evening lights, welcoming elegantly dressed guests who were making their way to its banquet hall. In her chambers, Sepia looked at herself in the mirror. Trying on a dress, she remembered that it had been a long time since she had worn evening wear. She chose the dress Roxanne had sent her, but she had doubts about whether it really suited her. When the elegantly dressed lord drove up and approached her, Her Highness called out to him. He was just about to say her name when he suddenly lost his ability to speak. The Empress was seized with a sudden fear that something was wrong. Perhaps she looked ridiculous. Stunned by her appearance, the husband hastily apologized, and he said quietly that she looked even better than he could have imagined. After all, the beauty of Her Majesty was stunning. She stood before him in a dark blue evening gown that gracefully draped her slender figure. Confused, Sepia asked if the outfit suited her. Coming closer, Roxanne gently assured the woman that the dress fit her perfectly, emphasizing the correctness of her choice. She smiled, noting how good it was that he had chosen blue. It also suited the man very well. The Lord thanked him, adding that it was his favorite color. Sepia couldn't believe it because it was her favorite too, noticing that they had so much in common. Holding out his hand to her, he asked permission to accompany the mistress, and she happily accepted his invitation. As they entered the banquet hall, they heard the guests whispering to each other, remarking on their harmonious pairing and the exceptional beauty of both. Raising her glass of wine, Sepia thanked everyone for their presence, and she expressed her wish that the fire of kindness would melt the winter cold and burn away all troubles. In response, everyone raised a toast to the fire of virtue. Suddenly, Demios entered the hall accompanied by his mistress. His displeasure was immediately noticed by the Empress, who was shocked by the appearance of her husband. The tension was transmitted to the guests, and she noted the spoiled mood of those present. Putting down her glass, the mistress walked over to him. Everyone knew that Demios did not fund charity, and his presence added a gloom to the atmosphere. The ruler looked at Her Highness and said that the situation seemed strange, as if he was out of place there. Holding his hand, Titia expressed her surprise that everything there belonged to His Majesty. In her opinion, there could be no place where he would not be received. Approaching them, Roxanne informed the Emperor that that evening was reserved only for those who had made a donation. With indifference on his face, Demios was silent for a while. Then he pulled out the written check and handed it to Sepia, stating that he would also contribute and asking if he could stay afterwards. The Lord, looking at him with a frown, did not look away. The owner understood that she needed to act before the situation worsened. She thanked her for participating and asked her to enjoy the evening with her partner. She was about to leave, but suddenly His Majesty's mood changed. His gaze became menacing, and he objected. After all, he had come to see the Empress and had grabbed her hand. The man had paid a high enough price, so he demanded to be given his time. Sepia was frightened. Suddenly, Titia intervened, not understanding what His Majesty meant, but he remained silent. The owner, taking his hand away, declared that her time was not a commodity. She would refuse the donation and return the money if he had made it just for the sake of it. Looking down, Demios growled that she better not behave like that if she didn't want to get into trouble. Suddenly, Roxanne interrupted the conversation, urging His Majesty to stop. He was surprised that the Lord dared to order him. Tension was building between them, and Sepia noticed that people around her had also stopped watching the scene. As she approached, the woman announced that she thought the Emperor wanted to speak to her, so she wanted to step aside for a moment. Her Highness approached Demios and asked him to leave. Roxanne did not take her stern gaze off him. Titi wanted to say something to the Lord. He menacingly ordered her to wait in the hall, waving his hand at her, which angered the lady. The man and the Empress were left alone on the terrace. He noticed that it was becoming difficult for him to exchange even a few words with the Empress, and asked if it seemed strange to the couple. Sepia immediately got to the point, trying to figure out what he wanted to talk about. The owner said he had the feeling that the woman was in a hurry somewhere, as if she was prey who only thought about escaping. In response, the Empress confidently remarked that His Majesty himself had long treated her as prey. The man was silent, but then he confessed his honesty. After all, he felt sorry for her. She could not understand his words. The Lord said that he was so sad for her that he could not contain his feelings. His gaze was filled with anger and cruelty. Then, holding his forehead, he added that he had had to wait a long time for her attention, and he was ready to understand everything, even her leadership of an absurd organization. He wondered if Sepia was opening her heart to him. She could hear the hidden hatred and conflicting feelings in his voice. All that time, Demios had been tormenting her just to get attention. Then the woman told him that she had once opened her heart to him, and that was a long time ago. The Emperor angrily refused to acknowledge a past he could not remember. In his opinion, only what was happening now mattered. However, for Sepia, the past was extremely important, because the moments she experienced shaped her as a person. She noticed that His Majesty was trying to win her heart by sacrificing the lives of his subjects. She wondered how he, being an emperor, could do such a thing. The owner denied everything, claiming that he opposed the charitable organization solely for its own good. But to Her Highness it seemed nonsense. She did not understand how it could be said that everything was done for her sake. He took money from the people, which caused many to freeze to death last year. The ruler compared it to animals changing their fur. The man stated that when the lower classes became excessively talkative, it negatively affected those who stood higher, destroying the structure of society. After listening, the Empress agreed with him, saying that there were winners and losers, a law of nature, where the strong devoured the weak. Stretching out his hand to her, he was glad that she finally understood him. And if she understood everything, he asked her to leave charity as a private institution. Sharply pushing his hand away, Sepia asked if he considered his subjects to be beasts, and declared that she had no intention of treating the inhabitants of the empire like animals. Approaching the door, Her Highness announced that she would never again open her heart to the Emperor, and left the room. She stood there stunned for a while, then suddenly saw Roxanne nearby, and she was surprised that he was waiting for her there. The Lord confirmed, taking her hand. He felt it turn completely icy. The woman looked away wearily. Sepia said that she just needed to rest, and asked the Lord to make her some hot jasmine tea. They were in one of the rooms where Roxanne had brought tea. The Empress had thanked him. He said that, to be honest, the request was dangerous, but Sepia didn't understand what exactly. Scratching his chin nervously, he explained that when she asked for jasmine tea and said she wanted to rest, the man thought the mistress was hinting at an invitation to the bedroom, like last time, and he awkwardly averted his gaze. Her Majesty was stunned and wanted to say something, but she couldn't. Then she stood up abruptly and announced that she had suddenly become very hot, opening the window to the terrace where bright moonlight poured directly onto her. The woman inhaled a breath of fresh air. Suddenly, Roxanne appeared behind her and began to slowly open the door. He quietly asked her to be more careful. The man noted that there had been some terrible rumors circulating recently, and in his opinion, opening the windows too wide wasn't the best idea. He had heard of the constant finding of animal bodies in the forests and gardens of the palace. Identical teeth and claw marks indicated the presence of a dangerous beast in the vicinity. The mistress became alarmed and remembered that she had heard something similar from Betty. She could not understand what had happened. After all, it was impossible to raise a beast in the imperial palace that was capable of causing so much harm to its relatives. The Lord suggested that perhaps someone had deliberately released a dangerous creature. Or perhaps it was all the fault of a beastman who couldn't contain his thirst for blood. Sepia knew that wild animals didn't hunt each other without a reason, and if the marks on the corpses were identical, it meant that the same creature had acted, not a group. If Roxanne was right, and it was the work of an uncontrolled beastman, the situation was extremely dangerous. She remembered Demios. The Empress sincerely hoped that the criminal would be caught as soon as possible. The Lord assured her that he would also make efforts to find him, and he asked her not to worry too much. After all, it was sad for him to see how Her Majesty's beautiful face became gloomy. The woman said hesitantly that she had something to say to Roxanne. They were sitting in the room drinking tea, and she said that she had heard everything from Madame Renaudie. The man, folding his hands, made it clear that everything was clear to him. Sepia apologized for not telling him everything at once. He said that he had had doubts before. His parents were wary of the late Empress Urdial, and now he saw that his suspicions were not unfounded. It was unexpected that the late mistress had created his red sword. Sepia couldn't understand that it was she who gave the order to go on a campaign. The man confirmed it, but another problem arose. Her Majesty was curious, but Roxanne didn't really want to talk. He said he would tell her everything later when the time was right. The mistress thought for a moment, feeling that he was hiding something important from her. But she couldn't figure out what exactly. Late at night, Her Highness was in bed. She was suddenly awakened by a sound from the window, the barking of a small animal that sounded more like crying. Opening the window, she saw a small fox on the windowsill. She immediately realized that it was the animal that had disappeared earlier. The owner took him in her arms, asking where he had been as she had searched him. Hugging him, she suggested he come with her, because the owner was waiting. Suddenly, the fox escaped from her hands and disappeared behind the wall. The Empress did not understand this behavior until a boy, Etensel, suddenly appeared before her. Sepia was shocked, asking what was happening. The young man in the cloak apologized for the fright and for the stupid beast. The woman didn't understand the reason for the apology. He explained that he pretended to be a fox and deceived everyone because he had no other choice. Only in this way could the boy convey his sincere feelings to the mistress. Her Highness affirmed that she had no feelings for the second son of the Crudio family. Etensel was shocked and confused. She seemed very angry. With a guilty face, he assured her that he had not intended to deceive her from the beginning. Then he could only truly exist in the form of a beast. Clenching his trembling hands, the young man announced that he had suffered from a terrible illness since childhood. A rare disease that prevented one from turning into a human until adulthood. But the Empress didn't understand what that meant. The boy fell to his knees, proclaiming the Empress his benefactor, without whose help he could not become a human. Sepia was indignant, not understanding his words. Etensel said he had tried many methods, but nothing helped him get rid of the disease. However, on the very day that Her Highness touched him, he was finally able to reincarnate. Suddenly, the mistress remembered that day, when she met a little fox in the garden and realized that he wanted to be petted. The woman touched him. The boy believed that it was she who cured his illness with the help of the star Ishtar. The goddess congratulated him on his successful reincarnation. However, Sepia insisted that she had no such abilities, considering it a mere coincidence. He continued to insist that it would not have been possible without her. The woman wondered, even if she was involved in this, he had already recovered. And it turned out that he no longer had problems with reincarnation. However, the young man said that he thought he was healed, until he returned to his original state. He did not understand why he could not become human again. And just in case, he came to Her Majesty. His guesses were confirmed. He was able to become human again after her touch. The Empress could not listen to him. Etensel begged her to help him. Otherwise, he would have to spend the rest of his life in the form of a fox, begging not to refuse. Sepia, looking at him, thought that she didn't really want to contact him while he was in the form of a grown man. However, if he turned into a fox, petting him wouldn't be a problem. She asked how often they would have to see each other. The guy happily announced that they first had to check how long one touch would last. After all, the time could vary depending on the distance between them. The mistress agreed only to such a test, and only to touch him in the form of a fox. The guy happily agreed. When Etensel understood her words, the Empress asked him to stand up. The young man promised to repay everything, but the mistress denied that she needed anything. She simply had to take care of him, because he was also her subject. Looking out the window, she noticed that the sun had already risen, and she said that she would send a message to the Crudio family later. So she asked him to come back soon. If the courtiers noticed the young man in the palace, they might have problems. The boy jumped out the window, sincerely thanking Her Majesty. Sepia exhaled, hoping that everything would work out and be fine. Etensel walked away, thinking about the guilt of lying. Having lived his entire life in the body of an animal, he had acquired unique abilities that no one knew about. His eyes could tell if he was facing a beastman. He remembered how the Lord had tried to pet him when he was a fox. Looking at him, the young man saw what he had longed to become, a perfect male in all his glory. To wrest the mistress from such a divine creature, Etensel had no choice but to make contact with Her Majesty, albeit in the wrong way. Therefore, he wished that the Empress would allow him to be near. Putting on his hood, the boy headed out of the palace. Demios sat silently, his gaze fixed on the documents on the table. The Empress entered the room. She asked him on what business he had come. The owner just looked at her and told her she should know better, and showed her the document. It was permission to establish a new department. He could not understand what it all meant. However, Her Highness assured him in a calm tone that everything was exactly as he had seen it. Now they wanted to create a charitable unit that would function as both a private organization and an official new body at court. The emperor smiled sarcastically and asked who had decided so. The Star of Ishtar, because it was her personal initiative. The woman approaching him declared all this. And she also added that she didn't know about everything, since His Majesty didn't say anything about the fact that there were separate sets of laws for the star. There was one who testified that Ishtar had the right to create departments without the emperor's permission. If Madame Swan hadn't told her, she would never have known. Therefore, Her Highness tried to find out if the ruler had deliberately kept silent about those laws. Frowning, the man informed her that she did not need to know. The enraged Sepia did not understand why His Majesty had made such a decision. Demios, threateningly ordering her, asked her to withdraw her statement immediately. He assured that even if the charity becomes an official department at the court, it still will not be allocated enough budget. The Empress flatly refused, insisting on allocating funds for the new department. She knew the laws very well. For the budget of the new department to be independent, either the consent of 2 members of the imperial family or guarantees from 3 aristocrats of the rank of marquis or higher was required. Demios, impressed by her knowledge, advised her not to waste time. Her Highness's only chance was to obtain the consent of 2 members of the imperial family. The woman was struck by his self-confidence. The emperor, surprised, asked if there was anyone else in their family besides the 2 of them. He smiled ironically and said that unfortunately he would never give his consent. He wondered where she was going to look for other members of the imperial family. Suddenly, Roxanne entered the drawing room. The sovereign did not expect to see him and was indignant that the lord had left the empress's bedroom. Sepia explained that they were discussing the opening of a new department, but were interrupted by unexpected guests. An angry Demios did not understand. What was the new matter, and why was she discussing it with him? Her Highness informed him that the lord would become the deputy representative of the charity department. The emperor was shocked. Roxanne placed the document loudly on the table and announced a statement in support of the budget independence for the new department. The man emphasized that he, Duke Claude Leofor, and as a member of the imperial family, supported the independence of the charity department's budget. In anger, His Majesty snatched the document and crumpled it. He trembled with rage, not knowing whether the woman intended to betray him or whether she knew everything. But the Empress stressed that it was not treason. She simply decided from the very beginning to take a different path. The Lord continued to shout, asking why the Lord, and pounded his fists hard on the table. Sepia declared that she did not know His Highness's thoughts at that moment. However, their views coincided more with Roxanne than with his, and there were no other reasons. The Emperor, throwing the document, announced that he had given the woman time, so that she could accept him. But in the end, she decided to betray the Lord's feelings and simply ignored him. Then, as he headed for the exit, Demios uttered his final words. Everyone around him ignored the Emperor, and he knew everything, all because he had not inherited the Droidian seal. The seal of Drodian, a pair of seals. They symbolized the Emperor and the people who possessed the power of a divine being. It was rumored that it was lost due to a fatal mistake by the late Emperor. According to palace gossip, he deliberately hid it. The man refused to acknowledge Demios. Of all the rulers of the empire, he was the only one who had not received the seal, and that became his personal curse. Sepia, turning around, replied to His Majesty that he had not left because of her. Besides, she knew that she was lost. After these words, the Emperor trembled with laughter. The Empress did not understand what was happening. He declared that he did not believe that she could believe such a thing. After all, the ruler had never lost his seal before. The woman emphasized that even without Drodiana, he was still Emperor. The angry Demios did not understand why the Empress had rejected him. According to Sepia, the reason for her unwellness lay in something else. The point was different. He treated their citizens like outbred animals. Their views on that aspect were radically different. Therefore, Her Highness decided to break off relations with the ruler. Demios remained silent, and then declared the unchanging nature of his feelings, despite her actions. Even if the woman hurt him, the man added that she was still his. But Sepia assured him that she had not hurt him and was not his property. The Emperor was furious, accusing her of causing him pain by constantly dragging herself around with that vile beast. His Majesty's merciless gaze fell on Roxanne, who was watching. Suddenly, he grabbed her head again, which was throbbing with unbearable pain. Frightened by his condition, Sepia asked if everything was okay. At that moment, the Emperor's hand turned into a wolf's paw and waving it, scratched her. Fearing for her safety, Roxanne rushed to the Queen. He shouted, urging the servants to immediately take Her Majesty to the castle. Once inside the safe walls, the Lord skillfully bandaged the Empress's wounded hand. She was surprised to note his skill. Roxanne smiled, assuring him that of course he knew his stuff. She noticed that the man had come to her aid again. However, as he stood up, the Lord asked her not to think that all he did was help her. After all, she also played an important role in his life. Thanks to Her Majesty, he was able to find his inheritance. Sepia, not expecting such a confession, asked with intrigue what the king had left behind. Roxanne hesitated to say anything. Then, taking a deep breath, he began to explain the king's legacy, but suddenly fell silent, lost in memories. The night of the charity reception shrouded the imperial city in a soft haze. But the Lord, despite the hubbub of the social event, went deep into his study. The candle on the table cast trembling shadows as he bent over the parchments and studied the old maps intently. With incredible precision, the man superimposed the map of the imperial city on the vast map of the empire. And in the flickering candlelight, an image emerged. The sacred wolf of the royal family appeared before his inner vision, and within it, 2 yellow eyes burned, like the reflections of an ancient secret. A storm of emotions flared up in Roxanne's chest. 2 yellow eyes pointed to 2 cherished things. That belonged to his father, that he had to find. The Lord immediately remembered the underground vault in the Empress's palace. That seemed the only logical explanation. Without wasting a moment, he hurried there. However, upon entering, he froze. The vault was empty. Disappointment squeezed his heart. But Roxanne didn't give up. He began to methodically tap on the walls, and suddenly, amidst the dull echo, one sound stood out, another, hollow one. His guess was confirmed. There was something there. Overcome with impatience, the man began to hit the wall with his elbow. With each blow, the cracks spread, and soon the stone gave in. Through the opening, he saw the majestic statue of the white wolf, and something shimmered in its open mouth, reflecting the candlelight. Bending down, Roxanne carefully put her hand inside. His fingers felt the cool metal, and he pulled out the Drodian seal. There was no doubt. He had found what he thought was lost forever. Roxanne remained silent, not revealing what he had found, except to say that he still had to find one of the things his father had left behind, and he promised to tell her everything when she was found. Sepia didn't know if it was just her imagination or if he was really hesitating with his answer at that moment. She was sincerely happy about his success in finding part of his father's inheritance. The Lord thanked her, and taking an old map from his waistcoat, announced that he could return it. Sepia remembered that if she took the map, her husband would probably return to Leofor. She felt strange, and her husband didn't understand what was happening to her. Sitting down, she asked if he would leave as soon as he found everything. After all, then he would have no reason to come to the palace anymore. That question surprised Roxanne quite a bit. He got down on one knee, gently took her injured hand, and quietly explained what reasons for returning will be. The Lord looked at her, deepening his gaze into her, emphasizing that she will be in the palace and he will have somewhere to return to. 2 weeks later, in her office, Sepia was intently reviewing documents when the court lady Soroka ran up to her. Filled with unbridled joy, she exclaimed, asking if Her Highness had heard that the entire capital was immersed in the atmosphere of the festival. Sepia smiled gently, having reported that public opinion seemed generally positive, and that pleased her. Soroka, in an elated mood, confirmed that this was quite natural, and it is wonderful that the charity has received the support of the imperial court. The queen thanked her for her words. Then the assistant sighed, noting that the mistress would have more work to do, and this upset the girl. With that, she made her mistress laugh. Suddenly the door opened and the commander entered the office, greeting the empress. She was pleased to see the commander of the guard. But what surprised her was the fox cub in his arms. The man, addressing the animal, asked it not to get out, but Sepia assured him that everything was fine. The commander smiled sheepishly, and thanked Her Highness for taking the time to spend with his insufferable younger brother, despite her busy schedule. The empress answered with honor that she was simply fulfilling her duty as an empress, taking care of her subjects. Then, glancing at the assistant, Sepia understood. It was clear from the very beginning that there was something special between them. It seemed that everything had finally fallen into place. As she approached the commander, she felt anxious. The Empress quietly asked her husband to hurry as they were expecting him. The commander blushed, not understanding what the mistress meant. She added that the girl was a good person and asked to take care of her. Jesper was silent and blushed even more at her words. Then, carefully putting the fox down, he agreed and invited Betty to walk with him. Watching them, Her Highness noticed how happy they seemed. She reflected that it was true love, and Roxanne's warm words flashed through her mind. That there would always be reasons to return because she would be there. The mistress's thoughts were interrupted by the fox cub, which began to make sounds. Sepia sat down with him on the sofa, and looking at the little animal, began to stroke it. She knew it was Etensel, and it was difficult for her to touch him. But even in the form of a fox cub, he nuzzled her hand, and he seemed very sweet to her. Sepia continued to stroke the animal, and suddenly a miracle happened. She saw in front of her not a fox cub but Crudio's second son. She was stunned to see him, a naked young man wrapped in a sheet. The boy was also surprised by his sudden transformation. The embarrassed Empress asked what changes had occurred since their last meeting. Etensel happily reported that he had become a fox 10 days later. Her Highness suggested the next meeting. The young man hurriedly dressed, noticing that the Empress was about to leave. He offered to at least have a cup of tea, but the mistress apologized, citing her numerous charitable deeds. With a sigh, Etensel declared that he would wait for their next meeting. He pulled on his hood and quickly left. Sepia thought as she watched him go. She certainly didn't hate the young man, but she didn't understand where the unpleasant feeling came from. Maybe some things were beyond repair. Later, she decided to visit Roxanne's office in the charity department. Her husband was surprised by her appearance. The woman noticed that he had arrived earlier than usual. The Lord assured her that the vice-chairman should have arrived earlier and waited for the chairman. After those words, the mistress wondered if the feeling of disgust would reappear after getting closer to him. If so, they would not be a happy couple in love. Concerned, Roxanne asked why Her Highness looked so alarmed. The woman had not expected her condition to be so noticeable. He assumed that something must have happened before she arrived, but Sepia assured him that it was nothing special. She had been so hard on herself that she felt an irresistible urge to speak out. Then, blushing and nervously clenching her hands, she confessed that she felt disgusted with men. The Lord listened attentively. Then he invited her to sit on the couch. The Empress continued, explaining that this made her feel embarrassed even in front of Etensel. Then she thought it wasn't the kind of topic she should be talking about in such a short time. And it felt strange to look like a grown woman who had that feeling. The man wasn't surprised and confirmed that such things happened, and explained that Sepia had probably spent a long time alone. She remained silent, noticing his sincere and understanding look. Roxanne did not condemn Her Majesty for that problem. Then he added that the fox turned out to be a descendant of the Crudio family. Sepia admitted this, and although she claimed that she would cope with the illness on her own, she was not completely sure. Therefore, she assured that she would independently try to find out about the disease that prevented the transformation into a werewolf, and served a cup of tea to Roxanne. He paused, then added that the Empress probably didn't like being around Etensel. The Empress admitted with embarrassment. When he was a fox, everything was fine, but it was unknown when he would be reincarnated, and Her Majesty could not ignore citizens who needed help. Suddenly, Sepia's cup slipped from her hands, spilling tea all over her and Roxanne. She immediately apologized and, getting up, tried to ask for a change of clothes. But the Lord grabbed her hand. The woman was surprised. She had not expected this. He pulled her hand to his chest, pressing it tightly, and asked what if it concerned him. Sepia was shocked. She remembered feeling this way before, but Roxanne... The mistress hesitated, then with difficulty uttered that everything was in order. After looking at her for a moment, the husband gently remarked that everything was fine, asking if he could help with her problem. Sitting down next to him, she didn't understand how exactly the man could help her. The Lord, with a gentle face and a slight smile, offered something to Her Highness, to use it as an object for practice to reduce the aversion. Sepia was surprised by that expression. The man gently tucked her hair behind her ear and asked her to touch him slowly. He held the woman's hand tightly. She felt his strong and very warm touch. Roxanne did not let go of her hand. The woman felt strange. Their eyes met. They stared at each other in silence. The mistress could not stop. Suddenly, he began to lean in, hugging her neck and wanted to kiss her. But that moment was interrupted by an assistant who burst into the room and called out to Her Majesty. Shocked and frightened, she recognized the voice of Madame Renaudie. The woman, panting, apologized to the Empress for disturbing her. She stood up and Roxanne, as if caught red-handed, hurriedly buttoned his shirt. The Empress asked if the woman had any business in the charity department, but the alarmed Madame reported that she had urgent news. The assistant whispered softly in her ear about the rumors of Lady Titi's pregnancy. Sepia was speechless with surprise. In the bright hall, the ruler and his concubine stood before a crowd of subjects. He wanted to announce important news. Touching her belly, she remembered the morning she found out she was pregnant, when she reported her condition to the doctor. The woman, after listening to her pulse, understood everything. With a smile, she confidently informed and congratulated the lady on her pregnancy. The news caught Titi off guard. She bowed her head and thought about finally getting pregnant just as she had wanted. But the most important thing then was to get the amniotic fluid tested to find out what race the baby would be born to. The Emperor's blood and her own must be dripped onto the sacred artifact. If mixed, a divine beast will be born. If not, an ordinary doe, just like her. Holding tightly to His Majesty's hand, she whispered that she was afraid, and her body trembled. Only one thought was running through her head. If there was no possibility of a divine beast being born, he would simply have given up on that child. The Lord watched her silently, and then he declared that he would take care of the child regardless of its race. Joyful Titi hugged His Majesty and sincerely thanked him, assuring him that she could only trust him so much. At that moment, an assistant approached them with 2 knives on a tray. He loudly announced that everything was ready for the ceremony. They both took knives, made cuts in their palms, and let the blood flow into a large bowl. Suddenly, a miracle happened. Their blood began to mix. All the subjects, clapping their hands, welcomed the Emperor, because their child would be a divine beast. Sepia clapped her hands in joy. A divine beast was growing inside her. She would become the mother of the future Emperor. The lady leaned against the ruler again, squeezing his hand tightly in a rush of happiness. However, the man stood with an unwavering indifference on his face. The subjects began to ask His Majesty about the date of the official announcement. After so many years, a descendant of imperial blood had finally appeared. But one of the aides hesitated, not knowing how to announce this to the people. Titi was frightened, not understanding what was going on. The man explained that it was the first time an illegitimate child would be born in the imperial family. The enraged concubine almost attacked him, demanding an explanation. How dare he call the Emperor's precious heir a bastard? Shocked, Titi couldn't understand how a subordinate could say such a thing. The subordinates present began to look at each other, and the frightened and disappointed lady turned to His Majesty, asking why he was silent. He calmly declared that they would announce the birth of an heir in 2 weeks, and then he dismissed all his subjects. When they had dispersed, he turned to Titi. His Majesty announced that the heir would be adopted by the Empress. The shocked lady asked what he had said. Over tea, Sepia turned to Madame Renaudie. After all, when they were alone, they could finally talk. The mistress remembered the news of Titi's pregnancy that the woman had told her. But first, the upset Renaudie wanted to tell her something. According to the results of the test with the sacred artifact, the child will be born a divine beast, the perfect heir to the imperial blood. Suddenly, Madame fell at Her Highness's feet and began to beg her. Sepia did not understand what had happened. She began to ask that Her Highness adopt the lady's child, because her child would be illegitimate. The mistress did not expect to hear this and did not understand what it was all about. Renaudie explained that His Majesty would also come to her with that proposal. Therefore, she insisted on not refusing him. Looking at Madame, Sepia understood her. After all, it was impossible to allow the heir to turn out to be a bastard. However, she announced that in any case, that child would find its mother. She remembered herself as a little girl, how she looked at every face at banquets in search of her mother. And she thought that the soul of a child who grows up without a mother's love will turn into hell. The woman, squeezing the Empress's hand, insisted on strengthening her position. Her Highness should adopt an heir of imperial blood. Madame understood that the mistress would refuse, so she begged her incessantly. But Sepia still began to object. However, the woman reminded her that if the ruler did not understand, she was putting herself in danger, remaining without an heir. The Empress was about to say something to Renaudie when suddenly there was a knock on the door of the room. It was announced that His Majesty the Emperor had arrived. Opening the door, he entered the room. Her Highness immediately wondered what had brought the man to her. With a serious expression on his face, Demios suggested they talk in private. When they were alone, Sepia offered him tea. She immediately asked what the conversation would be about. The Lord said that Titi was carrying his child. The woman remained silent, but he did not understand why there was no surprise. Instead, the woman explained that she was very surprised. With an ironic smile, he was convinced that it was not for nothing that she was called the cold-blooded Empress. It turned out that Sepia had anticipated his words. Coming closer, the man firmly said that if she was the Empress, she was obliged to adopt the lady's child. Her Highness was silent, deep in heavy reflection on the choice that stood before her as the mistress of an empire. There was only one answer. After all, Sepia did not believe she could love a child who was not her own. Therefore, she firmly refused. The Emperor, smiling, asked if she was really refusing, even though she had accepted the duties of Empress so easily. He ironically asked if it was the right time to be polite. The woman expressed her uncertainty about whether she could love the child. He was surprised by that answer, and he noticed that apparently it was about love. Smiling broadly, he looked at her. Then, holding his head, he began to laugh. Demios didn't understand that he would have to tell Titi about politics. Sepia, looking at him saddened, thought that His Majesty had threatened her by making his mistress Empress. Then, suddenly approaching her, he took her chin. He noticed that she looked unhappy. The man asked if there was anything she didn't like, to which the mistress ordered her to be let go. He continued to insist relentlessly. If she accepts his heir, they can restore their past relationship. However, Sepia refused, believing that no matter what he did, it would never be the same again. Those words made him furious. He started screaming and pushed her height down, not understanding what her problem was. Then she heard him start smashing dishes and furniture. He shouted that he had already forgiven all her sins, even resolved the issue with the heir, which was originally her task. Sepia looked at him in fear and did not understand. How could she not see that Demios was such a cruel person? He threw things, then grabbed a candlestick and swung it at the woman. She exclaimed that she had no feelings for him, and that was her problem. At that moment the Lord froze, then laughed. He threw down the candlestick and exclaimed, wondering if she was really as inaccessible as they thought she was. The Empress was frightened by his approach. He declared that no one knew whether her body could become pregnant, even in his arms. Then, pressing her against the wall, the man said that in that case she would let him check it out. But she screamed for him to stop. Sepia was scared and confused, but His Majesty continued to take off her clothes. Demios declared that he had shown what he was capable of. On the example of Titi, it was her turn. However, the woman begged him not to do that, to let her go. But he did not hear her. Suddenly, the mistress gave him a hard slap. Demios did not expect that. Throwing the dress over her shoulders, Her Highness told the story. When he squeezed her neck, the Empress asked if he knew why she did not resist. The sovereign did not understand anything, neither what he was strangling, nor when it happened. The woman said it was because she felt sorry for him. Sometimes he seemed to her like just a vulnerable child. This surprised the man, but she continued that now everything was different. After all, he was just a beast who showed his strength only to the weak, and abruptly left. The Emperor remained silent. The next morning, Sepia woke up with a terrible headache. She didn't understand what had happened. A confused magpie came running to her. The girl asked if Her Highness was okay. She didn't understand why the Empress had drunk so much the previous evening. Sepia was surprised how this could have happened. Then she remembered that she had taken out a bottle of alcohol and drunk almost all of it. It seemed to her that she had been a little drunk the previous evening after an argument with Demios, and after that, unfortunately, she didn't remember anything. The assistant, serving a glass of water, could not understand how the hostess had chosen such strong alcohol that it could cause poisoning. After taking the water, the hostess only said that she knew nothing about alcohol. The magpie was glad that fortunately the Duke knew how to help her mistress. Surprised, Sepia asked if Roxanne had come the day before. The pleased girl regretted that the lady didn't remember anything. The woman asked where he had been. The Lord sat in the drawing room, lost in memories. He remembered how he had come to the Empress in the palace. He called her, but there was silence in response. His visit was to discuss the affairs of the charity department, when suddenly he saw her unconscious on the couch. Frightened, Roxanne rushed to bring Her Highness to her senses. He was concerned about the woman's condition, but she only mumbled something indistinctly under her breath. Then, hearing his voice, she began to smile. And it was then that the man smelled the strong smell of alcohol. He couldn't tell if she had really been drinking. The Lord gave her medicine, a hangover potion that was supposed to help. He asked her to drink it, but the mistress was completely in no condition. She was asleep, and she couldn't take the medicine. He said, confused, that it was not a kiss but help. Taking a sip of the medicine, the Lord passed the healing liquid to Sepia, touching her lips. Roxanne felt uneasy as she remembered the previous evening. Suddenly he heard the door open, and Her Highness entered the room, asking if he was there. The husband was surprised and asked how she was doing. She assured him that she felt good because of him. She had heard about the hangover cure he had prepared, and she was grateful. He felt awkward. The Empress, noticing his anxiety, did not understand why he was silent. Had she done something the previous evening? Suddenly, Roxanne asked how often the woman drank. But Her Highness assured him that she usually did not drink at all, and asked him not to think anything of the sort. He said that something just happened then, and she succumbed to temptation. So he asked her to let him know if she had done anything wrong towards him that evening. Touching his lips, the Lord assured her that nothing of the sort had happened. But he asked Sepia not to drink alcohol in the presence of other men again. She was curious as to why Roxanne had told her that, so she agreed and took his direction. The man exhaled. The conversation went smoothly. Demios stood in the garden, dead birds lying around him. He remembered the Empress, and as he looked at the bird, he also remembered that she was the star of Ishtar. Then he abruptly threw the dead bird away, declaring that it was she who had chosen him, because that was exactly what had happened. And he thought that he needed to kill more. Suddenly he heard an unknown voice, which emphasized that His Highness looked very worried. Turning around, he saw a man in a black robe. The stranger asked if he could help the Emperor in any way, and as he put his hand to his chest, a snake crawled out of his sleeve. Meanwhile, the inhabitants of the empire read the decree that had been posted. Everyone was curious about what it said. It announced the conception of an heir of imperial blood. Everyone was surprised, because despite the mention of the conception, people knew that the child was a concubine. It was incredible to them that the Empress was going to adopt her. When Titi found out, she tore everything in her room, devastated and humiliated. The maids were worried. So many days had passed and the lady still could not calm down. The stunned concubine screamed, "How could you give her child to the Empress? And how was that even possible since she was his mother?" And she remembered how she had asked the Lord about using her for the sake of the heir. He had acted out of love, because Titi did not want the child to remain illegitimate. With tears in her eyes, the lady confirmed his words. And instead of giving the child to another woman, she picked up a shard of crockery, wanting to stick it into herself. She exclaimed that she would rather kill him herself. Suddenly, she heard the voice of one of the assistants, who entered the room and announced the arrival of a merchant named Blair. After all, the lady had asked to be sure to let me know when he would appear. Calming down, Titi left the wreckage and asked again if the gentleman had really come. When he was in the room, the concubine sat beside him and cried. She did not know what to do and asked how the Lord could do this to her. Holding the girl close to him, Blair began to calm her down, telling her not to cry so much, otherwise her beautiful face would suffer. The man warned about the importance of the child. Therefore, one must be more careful. The lady continued to say that she would get rid of it rather than give it to someone. He looked at her with his piercing gaze, one of which had a scar over its eye. Suddenly, looking into his eyes, the lady realized what she had just said. Titi apologized to the baby, regretting that she could even think about his death. The man remarked that she really needed to become a good mother. Suddenly, the snake hissed at Tita. The man told her to be quiet. After all, they still need her for now, and he asked for patience. After these words, the snake returned to his sleeve. Turning to the girl, he reminded her how she wanted to get pregnant, his beloved doe. But he did not understand her words, that the child would be taken from her. Titi reported that she had been told that the child would be adopted by the Empress, so that he would become the legal heir. But Blair was indignant that this was not possible. After all, she would be carrying the child. He emphasized that all members of the imperial family were simply greedy egoists. The disappointed lady did not want to lose her child. She said that if Her Highness did not adopt the child, it would become a bastard. Then the man emphasized in a calm tone. Titi had to make sure it wasn't taken away and that it became the rightful heir. But the girl didn't see a way to do that. Leaning towards her, he informed her with a smile that there was a way, and it was very simple. Blair whispered in her ear that the lady needed to become an empress. He also added that only then would she be able to raise her child. The lady, as if hypnotized, said that she really should become empress. The man praised his sweet Lan, emphasizing that thanks to the mark he had given her, she would become a mistress, and then she would get her revenge for his help. Tiddy asked what he wanted. Blair said he was looking for a book, and that after the coronation she was to give it to him. The lady was surprised. After all, only the mistress could find the book. It was safely hidden somewhere in the palace. A carriage pulled up to the estate. Her Highness, as she got out, hoped that there was nothing terrible about her unexpected arrival. She wondered if Roxanne was in the palace, but unfortunately she didn't notice anyone. After all, at this time everyone was usually training. Suddenly, Sepia heard the commander's voice greeting Her Highness. She noticed that he was wounded. And then, seeing the rest, she realized that Gror was not the only one injured. Frightened, she immediately asked if something had happened to the Lord. The commander said he was in his room. Unfortunately, he also failed to avoid injuries. The woman rushed to run to him. In his room, he lay bandaged in bed. The mistress called his name, and the husband, not expecting to see her, asked what she was doing with him. The Empress wanted to talk about Etensel's illness, but she immediately began to ask what had happened and where the wound had come from. The man, touching his shoulder, noted that it was just scratches. They bandaged him because there were too many of them, but the injury was not serious at all. Sepia didn't believe it and started worrying again. The Lord said that maybe he should get injured more often. When he looked at her with a smile, the woman was indignant. There was no need to talk about such things, even if it was a joke. She asked if he was really okay. Taking her hand, Roxanne confirmed everything, and if she felt more at ease, he asked her to check in person. The woman was embarrassed. The man asked her not to be shy and put Her Highness's hand to his chest. Sepia calmly touched him. The Lord emphasized that she should consider it a kind of continuation of the lessons. He held her hand tightly, resting it on his shoulder. Sepia felt something strange, as if everything in her stomach was trembling. The man asked how she was. Blushing, the Empress assured him that he was perfectly fine. He looked at her with a gentle gaze. Then she asked why everyone around was injured. The Lord said that they had been attacked outside the castle. Her Highness was surprised by this, and she thought that it must have been the wild beasts they had spoken of last time. The man denied everything, adding that they were beastmen who claimed to be residents of Leofor. The woman was indignant. How could such a thing be possible? After all, beastmen and even Leofor's subjects could have attacked Roxanne. The man reported that he had also investigated that incident. They seemed to be less subjects than creatures who did not treat humans any better. They were more like savages. Shocked, Sepia knew that if they were savage beastmen, they could return to their true selves. But they didn't turn into monsters like savages. The Lord also remarked that this was why he was sure they were savages. But the strange thing was that they had intelligence. She added that if they were savages, it would be impossible to communicate with them at all. Roxanne confirmed that this was exactly the case. And besides, the one they caught and interrogated kept repeating the same words that the disease had spread throughout the territory because of the Duke. The owner asked what the disease was, because she had never received such reports. That's why the husband couldn't understand what it was about. The Empress thought the incident was very strange, so she promised to try to find out something. The man smiled and added that he would be eternally grateful to her. She was silent, then turned away, blushing as he began to get up. The woman said that since he was up, he'd better get dressed and she'd go out. Roxanne agreed with a slight smile. Then Her Highness returned as he removed the sheet from her stomach. She noticed a large scar and asked him to wait, and asked about that large wound and when it appeared on him. The Lord was silent, and then he told her that it had been a long time ago, and he didn't remember. Looking at him, the woman remembered that winter day, when she was overcome with disappointment at how long she would have to live like this. The Empress, the palace, the empire, she was so scared. The only place she could breathe was the forest. Suddenly, as she approached it, she noticed bright red eyes glowing in the darkness. The girl was frightened, and suddenly a pack of savages attacked her. Closing her eyes, she heard the sounds of howling, and when she opened it, she saw a white wolf who had protected her. She knew it was Demios, and suddenly, as she stroked him, she noticed a large wound. Her Highness did not know what to do with such a deep wound. Looking the man in the eyes, she called him Demios. In response, the man called her name. Sepia was surprised and apologized, not understanding why she had suddenly called him that, and fell silent. She remembered that the scar she had seen was very similar to the one Demios had once received. Of course, then it was his real body, and in front of her was Roxanne. The mistress understood that they could not be compared. Looking at him, she wondered what the true incarnation of the Lord was. Of course, she would never have to see that. After all, beastmen only became their true selves when they were with a partner. The man asked the Empress if everything was okay. She assured him that it was, but added that he must have been very worried about Leofor's affairs, and he confirmed it. After all, it was his domain and the place where he spent his childhood. Leofor, this is a territory where forests join the sea, a beautiful and fertile land. Roxanne added that he would really like to go there with her someday. After all, the woman had probably never been to sea. He really wanted to be with her when she saw him for the first time. After thinking about it, the mistress agreed that they would go there someday. Suddenly a thought struck her. Had she ever told the Lord that she had never seen the sea? It seemed that only Demios and her childhood knew about it. Her Highness stared at her husband. And the sea and that scar. Sepia couldn't believe so many strange coincidences. When the Empress's carriage arrived at the palace, Eatansel stood before her. She had not expected to see him. He bowed and reported that since the mistress had not contacted him, he had decided to come personally. After all, he did not know when he would be able to reincarnate again. The woman was silent and then suggested a short walk. They walked along the garden paths. Suddenly, the Empress turned to Mr. Crudio. She menacingly declared that she had known everything for a long time, and his words were a complete lie. The young man turned noticeably pale, bowing his head and hiding his eyes. The day before, Sepia had met with the Lord and asked what he had learned about the disease. He explained that everyone who suffered from the disease had one thing in common. The parents of the patients were of different races. Perhaps the rare disease arose from such unions. She agreed that such marriages did occur. He also added that they could reincarnate at an unspecified time after reaching maturity. And they said that the timing of reincarnation depended on their willpower. Then the woman guessed that young Eatansel could transform himself, and he didn't need her to touch him at all. Clenching her fist tightly, Roxanne confirmed. After all, it seemed that the woman had guessed everything, and it seemed that the guy had feelings for her. The enraged Empress asked Eatansel if he had not thought of another way to approach her. The boy nodded and agreed. It was the only way for him since there was another male with her. But she was indignant, which didn't mean he had to lie. The young man agreed that he had made the wrong choice, but still his feelings for Her Majesty were sincere. He confessed his love to her. The woman turned away and said that she could not accept his feelings, and she definitely did not intend to accept them in the future. The saddened Eatansel knew of her refusal, but the pain did not subside. He turned to the mistress, putting aside his feelings, and said that he had something to tell her. And he asked that his words be perceived not as a declaration of a husband, but as concern for the Empress. He asked her to beware of His Majesty. She was stunned and didn't understand what the young man meant, but for now, he just said that was all he could tell her. If necessary, the boy asked to give him a sign and would wait. Kissing Sepia's hand, he added that he would pray for her well-being, turned and left. Looking at the sunset, the Empress smiled. It had been a busy day. She decided to take a walk to clear her mind, and she began to delve deeper into the garden. She replayed Eatonsel's words in her head and didn't understand why he had said that to her. Suddenly, she smelled a smell that resembled iron. She didn't understand what it was. Looking at the lake, Sepia saw that it had turned red. She was shocked, and then she tripped over something. Looking down at the ground, the owner saw the dead deer. She was shocked and almost screamed. Looking around, she noticed that everything around was covered in blood. Her Highness did not understand what was happening there. Looking at the entrance to the lake, she saw Demios, waist-deep in water. The woman was shocked to see him and began calling for the Emperor. The mistress could not even imagine that the beast they were talking about was Demios. Looking at the mutilated bodies, she could not understand the reasons for the cruelty. After all, he had no motive to kill so many animals. Noticing her height, he noted that he had hunted a little. The woman was amazed that he had killed all those animals. The man continued that it was something of a hobby of his. Looking at the pools of blood, Sepia couldn't believe how that carnage could be called liking. The ruler added that it was even better for the Empress. After all, he had restrained himself by killing animals instead of beastmen. She started shouting at Demios, demanding an explanation. He, raising his voice, replied that it was all for her sake. After all, he had done everything she wanted. Suddenly, Sepia noticed his bare torso. There were no visible scars on His Majesty's body. The skin on his back was smooth without any damage, and she realized that the man was not the Demios she knew. Then she asked who he was. Coming out of the water, the emperor approached her and replied that he was her husband, the ruler of the country, the Lord. But the woman denied everything. After all, from the very beginning, he was not the one she knew. The Demios of her memories and His Majesty were completely different people. However, the man replied indifferently that he had no idea what Her Highness meant. But Sepia knew that he knew everything. If you think about it, there was a lot of talk about that too. After all, sending the crown prince to study abroad seemed like a strange decision. And for a whole 5 years. And a thought struck her. What if they had sent not the crown prince but his double? The empress was interested in one thing. Since when had he been replaced? She suddenly asked why he had deceived her. The emperor was silent. And then he announced that it was Sepia who asked him for help. She begged to be saved from the Huron Empire. But she objected. The woman was sending letters to Demios, not to him. Then the man grabbed her by the face and started screaming, "What difference did it make?" The only important thing was that he was the one who saved the girl and became a man. The fact that she became an empress was also his merit. However, the woman categorically refused to accept it. After all, most importantly, the Lord deceived her, and she lived in delusion all the time. Sepia raised her voice and asked why he didn't ignore the letter. After all, His Majesty had made her empress only because she was the star of Ishtar. The owner began to laugh and did not understand whether the woman really thought that was all that mattered. And he declared that he simply wanted to take away what belonged to him. Suddenly, Her Highness realized that the Lord was talking about the Demios she had met as a child, the wolf cub she had truly loved. And immediately she remembered Roxanne and his phrases about the sea. The empress was amazed and shocked at the same time. Tears almost appeared on her face. Coming closer, the man declared that he loved her. After all, at first it was just fun, and the second reason was prophecy. But recently, everything had changed. He truly loved Sepia. After all, he had saved her, and she herself had sworn to always be by his side. The confused woman explained that the oath she had taken was not addressed to His Majesty. In a rage, the man shouted how many times he had to repeat it. The emperor saved the empress, not the one who was sent to Huron. The one who was with her the whole time was him. Demios was furious. His hair was standing on end. And she realized that the man was beginning to transform into his true self. After all, it had all been a mistake from the very beginning. Looking back, Sepia thought that she should go to him, to true love. As the empress was about to leave, she saw a huge shadow in front of her. Turning around, she saw a fierce wolf with bright red eyes. Looking at all that, she could not understand that it was a divine beast. To her, everything seemed like a rage and madness that could only belong to a monster. The wolf declared that he wanted the mistress to know nothing. If she continued to live in ignorance, they could be happy. But none of that mattered then. He said loudly that Her Highness was his anyway, then and forever. As Sepia was about to retreat, she tripped over a dead animal and fell. At that moment, the huge wolf ordered the empress to be seized. His subordinates ran out of the forest and surrounded her. The frightened woman screamed for them not to do this. The men covered her mouth. The mistress understood only one thing. She had to go to Roxanne, to her lover. And suddenly she fainted in the arms of His Majesty's subjects. When she regained consciousness, Sepia did not immediately realize where she was. Around her was a large white room. As she stood up, she heard Madame Remaudy's voice. She was amazed that the lady had regained consciousness. Madame offered her a glass of water and asked if the mistress was all right, as she had been in bed for 2 days. The empress was amazed at how many there were. Suddenly she remembered how she had been surrounded by the emperor's men, and how frightened she had been when they had covered her mouth. So, having lost consciousness and slept for 2 whole days, Her Highness assured her that everything was fine. The only thing she was interested in was where she was. Remaudy informed them that they were in the Archduke's palace. His Majesty had issued a special decree. From then on, Sepia was forbidden to leave that place. She knew that the palace had long been abandoned, a real ghostly place. That was where the mistress had ended up. Madame handed over a letter from His Majesty. Opening it, the Empress saw a document of divorce with the reason refusal to live together. Her Highness was shocked by the statement due to renunciation of marital intimacy. The divorce was to take place in a month. Having drawn up the document, she declared that if she went to court, she would not be allowed to go out at all. Remedy bowed her head and exhaled heavily. The assistant confirmed that the emperor had forbidden even his maids to enter her house, but she pleaded for a long time and begged him to let her in at least. Then everything became clear to Sepia. They decided to expel her from the palace and lock her up in that place so that Titi could become empress. But Remodi noted that it was not only about that. All of Her Majesty's good deeds were attributed to the government. The astonished empress did not understand what the woman meant. Madame added that the charitable foundation she had created was rumored to have been created by Titi. The lady was not sure that the nobles would believe those words, but it didn't matter to the madam whether they believed it or not. But they certainly wouldn't pretend to believe it. The calm Sepia added that the lady would probably become empress soon, and no one would want to spoil their relationship with her without a special reason. But for the assistant, it was a very unfortunate and unfair situation. She couldn't understand how His Majesty could do such a thing. The mistress was silent and thought, could it be that she really wouldn't be able to meet anyone before the divorce? And she immediately remembered Roxanne, whom she really wanted to see. In her newly furnished chambers, Titi lay on her bed intently writing a letter. She addressed the empress and wrote about the rumors that she had been imprisoned. Expressing deep concern for Sepia's health, the lady offered to send fruit and hoped that the mistress was in perfect order. She then added that Her Highness had done a great job and congratulated her on the divorce. The concubine was delighted, imagining how angry she would be when she read the letter. She longed to see the expression on the woman's face. Suddenly Demios entered, and the lady threw herself into his arms with joy. The room immediately seemed warmer because of him. With an impassive face he agreed, noting that the air was filled with the fragrance of flowers. The lord, noticing the basket, asked what it was. Titi reported the fruits she wanted to send to the empress. She explained that since Sepia was far away, special attention should be paid to her health. She thought cynically that if a woman suddenly decided to kill herself, she would have to deal with the consequences. The lady was eager to see how desperate Sepia would appear in the courtroom. The lord stood silently, embracing his concubine. The day of the divorce arrived. The courthouse was packed with people gathered to decide the fate of their marriage. The judge announced the arrival of the son of the empire. Demios entered the hall and took the seat offered to him. Then the judge ordered Sepia Bayandrodian to come forward. She stood up and approached slowly. Among those present in the hall were Soroka, Madame, and the manager of the charitable foundation. They watched the events with excitement. Looking around, Her Highness heard Etinsel exclaim, addressing her. But Jesper could not understand whom she was trying to find. She looked away, feeling sad. Demios also guessed that the woman was looking for the lord. He gritted his teeth and ordered the trial to begin immediately. The subjects brought a special magic mirror into the hall, from which a man emerged. He noted that they had not seen the emperor of the beastmen for a long time. It was Silthajane Verdian, the high priest of the temple of the sea god, the sea dragon. He was also glad to see the star of Ishtar. The priest looked at them with his blue eyes that resembled the sea. The news made him a little sad, and he asked if they were sure about the divorce. The enraged emperor added that he had a specific accusation against the empress, so there was no need to doubt. He announced to the entire hall that it was a refusal to fulfill his marital duty. Those present were amazed that it was all because of that. Verdian turned to Ishtar, asking if she confirmed His Majesty's words that she refused to share his bed. Sepia confirmed the accusation. When asked if she had anything to say in her defense, she replied that she had never shared a bed since she took office. Therefore, the priest declared that since the empress did not deny the accusation, neither witnesses nor evidence were needed. After all, the birth of an heir is the most important duty of a ruler, and the refusal to do so is an obvious reason for divorce. Verdian turned to the emperor, asking if he agreed to a divorce. Contemplating from under his brow, he agreed. Then the man turned to Sepia, asking if she agreed to the divorce. Raising her eyes, she affirmatively declared that she agreed. Therefore, as the high priest who was responsible for the wedding, he approved the divorce of the ruler and the empress. Sepia Bayandrodian was stripped of her status as empress. The emperor approached her, addressing her by name. She, thinking that she would be expelled from the Beastman Empire, bowed her head in submission. However, Demios announced his decision. That since Sepia was human and the star of Ishtar and tied to the fate of the Beastman Empire, he stripped her of her title of empress, granting her the status of archduchess. The woman was amazed. In the empire of that time, the status of archduchess was just an empty title. After all, there were no corresponding archduchesses. The king wanted her to live like a ghost. With obvious displeasure, he added that she was forbidden to leave the palace, and she couldn't meet anyone without his permission. Then, leaning over, he said ironically that this was how she would live her whole life. Alarmed and furious, Sepia exclaimed that she would rather be banished. However, His Majesty denied everything. That was impossible. He had to protect their precious star. She wanted to add something, but he announced the end of the trial, and he sternly ordered 2 of his men to take Her Highness away. As they began to lead her out, Titi suddenly ran up to the ruler. She hugged him and said that he had done a great job, casting a sly glance at Sepia, and she noticed it. Sitting in her chambers, the woman could not recover. Everything seemed like a bizarre dream. Looking at her own hands, she went over the past few days in her memory, and she imagined Roxanne's arm embracing her own. Suddenly, she wept bitterly, realizing that she would have to live in confinement for the rest of her days. Suddenly, Sepia heard the voice of Madame and wondered why she was nearby. The woman announced that she would stay with her mistress. After all, she needs someone to serve. An upset Ishtar announced that if Ramodi decided to become her servant, she would also be imprisoned. She assured him that it was not too late to return, and she added that she was no longer the empress, so she asked not to be called that. The assistant sharply objected. Since she was the only one who imagined Sepia as the empress, she fell at the feet of the ruler. She declared that Her Highness had performed her role admirably. She also noted that she had accepted the weakest into the empire and fought the strongest. Madame assured that thanks to the empress, many people's lives had become easier and people were happier. And she begged them never to forget this. She stood up, hugged her mistress, and assured her that she would not disappear. She asked if she understood her, and they both cried. Sepia agreed with her. Night fell. Her Highness was resting when she suddenly heard a sound. She started to call out to Madame, but then she thought she must have heard it. After all, the woman was supposed to be sleeping in the next room. Sepia was puzzled. Opening the door to her room, she asked if anyone was there, and she stepped into the wide, dark corridor. A slight fear pierced her, but she was absolutely sure she didn't think so. Suddenly, the name of that place, the haunted palace, flashed through her mind. Perhaps ghosts really did roam there, and she decided to return to her room immediately. As soon as the Archduchess's foot touched one of the tiles, it suddenly gave way. Sepia began to fall rapidly to the bottom. She screamed loudly in fear and was suddenly caught by someone. The shocked woman looked up and saw Roxanne.